Let's be honest. When you think of Victorian London, your mind probably conjures something out of a Jane Austen novel or a cozy BBC drama. Horse-drawn carriages rolling past gaslit streets, ladies in lace sipping tea, and a dashing detective in a deerstalker, solving crimes with clever banter and a warm scarf. It's quaint, it's charming, it's a complete lie, because the real Victorian London, it didn't smell like rose gardens and pipe tobacco. It reeked of sewage, soot, sickness, and something worse you couldn't quite name, but definitely didn't want to step in. The streets weren't full of well-mannered conversation. They were loud, chaotic, and full of people just trying to survive the day without being trampled, pickpocketed, or suffocated by coal smoke. This was a city where the fog didn't just roll in, it attacked. It crept into your lungs, clung to your clothes, and hid things you really didn't want to bump into. Your home wasn't a tidy parlor with fresh flowers. It was one damp room, 7 people, a rat you considered naming, and a bucket in the corner that handled every bodily function. You didn't walk out the door in the morning. You stumbled into war, and yet people lived here. They laughed, cried, loved, and somehow endured it all. This is not the London of fairy tales. This is the London of cracked floorboards, ragged, lungs, and impossible choices. So settle in. Dim the lights. Breathe slowly, and prepare to meet a city that wasn't built for comfort, but for sheer, brutal survival. Now let's pause for a moment and ask the question no one dares to in your favorite Victorian drama. How exactly did anyone survive this? I mean truly, day after day, fog after fog, with nothing but grit and a half-clean blanket to their name. If you're picturing inconvenience, you're not thinking hard enough. This wasn't about being a little cold or skipping a proper breakfast. This was about surviving a world that seemed custom-built to grind you down from the minute you opened your eyes. Tonight, we begin in the dark. Not the cozy kind, the kind that smells like damp socks and forgotten cabbage, the kind that creaks when you shift your weight and groans when you try to stand up. We're not in the London of penny novels or Queen Victoria's garden parties. No carriages on cobblestone, no lace parasols. We're starting in the kind of place where dreams get mildew, where waking up feels more like surrender than renewal. So before we begin, take a breath. A shallow one. There's soot in the air. Tuck your blanket in, close your window if it still closes, and listen. We're going to Victorian London, but not the one from books, the one from the bucket in the corner, your eyes open to a wall. Not painted, just wall bare wood, speckled with mildew and spider webs that might be structural at this point. There's something damp dripping in the corner again. Might be rain, might not. You've stopped trying to figure that out. You share the room, of course you do. 6 others all crammed in with you. There's one bed barely holding together and 2 chairs that aren't so much furniture as wooden suggestions. The youngest sleeps under the table. The oldest uses a broom handle to prop his head up. Everyone shifts during the night, like rats scrambling for a dry patch. Your blanket, it's not new. It wasn't new when your grandfather had it. It's thin, scratchy, and smells like old wool and damp regret. But you're lucky to have it. Most nights you wrap it around your legs and curl your body inwards like a fossil waiting to happen. The pillow is a sack, stuffed with straw, lint, and something crunchy you try not to identify. You sleep with your mouth closed, not to stop, snoring but to avoid inhaling whatever's in the air. If the cold doesn't wake you, the smell does. It's a unique blend. Smoke from the neighbor's stove, damp wood, human breath, laundry that hasn't been washed in weeks, a bit of mold, and beneath it all, the metallic twinge of the chamber pot in the corner, half full and glowing faintly in the morning light. Let's not dance around it. That bucket, that's the toilet. Also the bath if you're desperate. It has to be emptied each morning, usually by whoever lost the argument or stepped in it first. You can try to pour it into the street, but the gutter is already full. The neighbors dump theirs out too, sometimes from the upper floors. A good aim means you don't get splashed, but no one has a good aim before breakfast. You breathe through your mouth. It helps. A bit. There's no running water. No stove. Just a fireplace that doesn't burn anything because coal is expensive, and the last log was used to patch a hole in the roof. When it rains, the ceiling leaks. When it doesn't rain, it still leaks, just slower. You know which floorboards. Groan. Which ones stab? Which ones bend and never come back? You can't walk silently, but you can walk smart. You learn fast in a room like this. Either that, or you limp for a week. There's a window, technically, but it's so thick with soot and fog that you don't know if the sun's up until the neighbor starts yelling about stolen boots again. You wipe it with your sleeve. Your sleeve comes away dirtier. The view is the alley, always the alley, brick walls, stacked crates, a goat someone tried to keep quiet and failed. Getting ready is a group event. Everyone dresses at once, not out. Have enthusiasm. Just because the cold makes you move faster. You layer clothes over clothes, some still damp from yesterday. If you're lucky, you get the wash basin first. If not, you splash your face with cold water that smells like rust and something vaguely fishy. Someone's always late. Someone's always loud. Someone knocks over the bucket. Shoes are shared, tied together with string, patched with waxed paper, sometimes held on by luck alone. One child gets both lefts, doesn't matter. They're going out anyway. Breakfast isn't served, it's scavenged, a crust of bread, some tea that's more water than leaf, milk, if someone didn't water it down overnight. Sugar? That's for people with spoons or teeth. You chew slowly. You chew because it gives you something to do. You chew because it makes you feel human. You chew because it delays the inevitable. There's a fireplace in the room, but it's mostly symbolic. No firewood, no coal, just ash from months ago and the memory of heat. You all sit near it anyway, like it owes you something. You can still see the burn marks on the bricks. Someone tried to cook a potato once. It exploded. That was a fun day. Something smelled different for a change. There's a shelf above the fireplace. It holds 3 things: a candle stump, a cracked cup, and a button no one remembers owning. The candle gets used during the worst fogs, when the sun forgets to rise. The cup gets shared. The button stays because throwing it away would be wasteful. Everything in the room has stayed because no one could afford to remove it, or replace it, or clean it. Even the rats are long-term tenants. There's one that limps. You call him Governor. He only comes out at night and usually brings crumbs back with him. You've started to respect him. The cold is not the worst part. You wrap your coat around you like it's armor. It's not, it's wool with holes. But you tie it tight and you press forward because the outside world is waiting, and you need to be in it before the jobs are taken. Your hands are raw. Your knuckles split. You lick the blood off because bandages are for rich people, and infections are just how life ends sometimes. Someone sneezes. You all flinch. You don't say, bless. You just hope it's not consumption or typhoid, or the kind of cold that turns into a cough that never goes away. You hear a baby crying 2 floors down, and someone's swearing about the stairs again. The building sags when people move. It wheezes like it's alive. And yet somehow, you've memorized every inch of it. The bend in the banister, the brick near the door that's warm even in winter, the hook on the wall that nobody trusts. It's not just a room, it's a world. Yours, you might hate it, but you know it. And that's something. You open the door, it's morning, or something like it. The sky is grey. The air is thicker inside. Then it is out, but only just. You step outside, down the hall, past the couple arguing in whispers, and the old woman who still sings to herself at dawn. Down the narrow stairs, across the warped floorboards, and out into the street. It greets. You like a wet slap. The fog hits first, then the smell, then the noise, and you haven't even left your street yet. But that's tomorrow's problem. Right now you're standing there, coat tied tight, stomach half full of stale crust and old tea. You haven't breathed properly in weeks. You haven't rested in months. But you're still here, and that's enough for now. You step out and the world slaps you in the face. Not with noise, not yet. First it's the air, thick, wet, bitter. The kind of air that doesn't just sit on your skin, it seeps into it. Coal smoke from 100 chimney pots, mingled with river fog, and the faint acidic bite of horse dung. You breathe through your mouth because that's the rule. Through the nose is punishment. Through the nose is regret. The street is uneven beneath your feet, a jagged mess of cobblestones, puddles, and something that might be soup or might be vomit. You try not to step in anything with texture. You move quickly, not because you're late, but because standing still is an invitation, for a shove, for a theft, or for the weather to choose violence. It's not raining, but your shoulders are already damp. That's just how the fog works here. It doesn't fall, it clings. You can't see more than a few feet ahead. The lamps are lit, even though the sun technically rose an hour ago. They burn with that gaslight flicker, dim and jittery, like they're scared of the fog too. One glows orange over your shoulder. Another one ahead barely cuts through the mist. You don't make eye contact with anyone. That's not rudeness, it's survival. The man shuffling past you might be harmless. He might be drunk. He might be something else entirely. You keep your head down, your hands close to your pockets, your pace steady. A shout echoes across the alley. Someone's already been robbed. It's not even breakfast time. The road bends. And you duck past a cart with a broken wheel, spilling potatoes across the path. A boy about your age is cursing at it while trying to keep the horse from bolting. You don't stop to help. No one does. The best anyone offers is a quick sidestep to avoid the worst of the mud. Someone else slips. You hear the squish, the splash, the curses. They get up angry, not embarrassed. No one helps. A passerby laughs once, just once, before vanishing. Back into the smoke. This is the part no one tells you about. The smell isn't just bad, it's everywhere. It's in the walls, it's in your hair. You walk through it like a fish through water, and you forget it's not normal until you catch a whiff of something different, like bread or clean linen. And then the contrast hits so hard, it almost makes you cry. You pass a butcher's stall. The meat hangs loose on rusty hooks. Flies move faster than the knife. The butcher wipes his hands on an apron already too stained to make a difference. He offers you a smile. It doesn't reach his eyes. His teeth are the same yellow as the fog. You don't stop to buy anything. You couldn't if you tried. Even the offcuts cost more than you've got. You just keep moving. Past the rows of vendors, selling eels in buckets of water that stopped being clean sometime last week. Past a woman shouting about onions. Past a boy throwing stones at pigeons, and another boy selling matches from a threadbare tray strapped to his neck. Everything is wet. Everything is grey. Everyone is coughing. It's a sound you get used to. A background rhythm. Old men with deep, rattling hacks that sound like their lungs are trying to give up. Women with pinched faces and red noses, sneezing into sleeves. Children coughing like they've smoked since birth. The doctors say it's the fog. The city says it's not there. Problem. You see the smoke belching from factory stacks in the distance, thick plumes climbing upward, only to roll back down over the rooftops and settle in the alleys like a second skin. You walk past laundry lines hanging above puddles of filth. The clothes don't dry. They just trade one smell for another. 2. Men argue outside a tavern. One pushes the other. A bottle breaks. You don't look back. You pass a row of narrow doors, each leading to a different tenement. Some buildings lean forward like they're whispering secrets to the street. Some have broken windows stuffed with rags. The alleys between them are dark, even in daylight. You don't go down those alleys. Not unless you're invited. And even then it depends on who's asking. You glance up. The rooftops vanish into the smog. The sky is just a suggestion. Somewhere above all this, the sun is supposed to be shining. You haven't seen it clearly in weeks. You cross the street quickly. No carriages just now, but the horses come fast when they come at all. Mud. Splashes up to your knees. Something crunchy sticks to your boot. You keep walking. You've learned not to inspect your own footprints. At the corner, someone's selling something from a cart. Roasted chestnuts or maybe yesterday's potatoes. The smell is burnt and greasy. You pause just long enough to inhale it. That's free, the food isn't. You reach into your pocket, a half penny. Not enough for much. You could get tea or half a bun. Or nothing if the vendor decides he doesn't like your face today. You move on, you pass the schoolhouse. The windows are fogged, the children inside pale and silent. You used to go there, sort of, until work took over, or hunger did, or something. Else, you pass the workhouse too, just long enough to hear the gate close, just long enough to see someone shuffling out with their head down and their coat too thin. You wonder how many people went in and never came out. You don't wonder too. Long further down the lane someone sings, a street fiddler, missing 2 strings and 3 teeth, scraping out a tune that might have been cheerful once. You don't stop, but the sound lingers. It always does. By now your feet are soaked. You can't feel your fingers. The fog has started. to collect in the folds of your coat, adding weight like regret. A bell rings somewhere, church or factory, hard to tell. You're almost there. Your job, your station, your place in the machine. But the streets don't want you to make it easy. A cart nearly clips your shoulder as it barrels past, sending a wave of grey water across your legs. You don't yell. You don't even flinch. That's just how things work. The road belongs to the faster, the heavier, the meaner. You duck into a doorway to catch your breath. You wipe your face with your sleeve. It makes things worse. You're hungry. Of course you are. You've been hungry since Tuesday. But it's not the kind of hunger that growls. It's the kind that whispers, quiet, persistent, like a shadow you can't shake. You think about stealing something. You always do. You don't. Not because it's wrong, because the man at the stall has a stick and a bad temper, and last week someone tried and ended up with a broken nose and nothing to show for it. You move again. You pass a woman sweeping her doorstep. Not because she wants it clean, because she wants to look busy. It helps. Sometimes you hear a baby cry, you hear a man curse, you hear the clang of metal and the crunch of something underfoot. You don't look down. Someone calls. Your name. You pretend not to hear it. You're almost late. And then there it is, the gate, the door, the job, 12 hours of it. Maybe more, on your feet, in the smoke, with noise so loud it carves into your skull and leaves marks. But you've made it. You're here for now, and the streets. They haven't killed you yet, but they're not done trying. The door creaks behind you. Not loud, just enough to let you know you've arrived. A dull wooden sigh. You wipe your feet, out of habit, not hope, and step inside. It's warm, but not comfortable. Not in the way warmth should feel. It's the warmth of too many bodies and too little air. The warmth of boiled grease and steam that never quite escapes. You're here, at the factory, at work, and it smells like oil and ash and old iron. Like things that were never alive and still managed to rot. You pull your coat tight around your middle and blink into the dimness. The windows are coated in grime. The lamps swing overhead, but they don't shine so much as glow. Faintly, like memories of light. Someone coughs behind you. They always do. The floorboards are sticky in places, wet in others. You don't ask with what you've learned. You follow the same path each day, past the same men and women, past the same rows of benches and belt-driven machines, past the girl with the missing finger and the boy who hums a tune under his breath until someone tells him to stop. Your station waits for you. There's a stool, crooked, flat, a table, splintered at the edges, and a pile of things that need doing. Always needing, always waiting, always more than you can finish. You begin without thinking, because that's the point. You sort, you stitch, you pull, you press, over and over, until the movements happen without permission, until you stop feeling your hands and start feeling time folding over itself. You forget the outside. You forget the fog. You forget the sun. You forget to blink. There are no clocks here, only bells, loud ones, sharp, one for starting, one for stopping, one if someone loses a hand. You've heard all three, but time doesn't move quickly here. Not like in stories. It drips, it stretches, it hums in the machines, rattles in the gears. It becomes a texture, a sound, a weight. A small voice calls out. You look up. A girl across the way, no more than 10, has dropped her needle. It clattered to the floor. No one moves to help her. That's not how this place works. She bends slowly, carefully. Her hands tremble. She retrieves it. The foreman watches, says nothing. You return to your work. The steam pipe behind you hisses. You don't flinch. You stopped reacting to noise 2 months ago. Everything here makes noise. Everything grinds and clicks and smashes. The world is mechanical, except you. Your eyes begin to blur. You squint harder. You press forward. You can't leave. Not early. Not for anything less than bleeding or collapse. And even then it depends who sees it. Somewhere nearby, a metal press jams. Someone curses. The foreman shouts. There's a pause. And then the rhythm returns. Even the machines don't get a break. You try not to think about your stomach. It stopped rumbling hours ago. Now it just folds in on itself, polite in its misery. Lunch is coming. If you can call it lunch. The bell rings. That same clang. Like a church bell that forgot how to be holy, you stand slowly. Not because you're tired, but because everything aches. A deep ache, bone level. And it's quieter if you don't rush. You shuffle outside with the others. No coats, just arms crossed. Teeth clenched. The cold slaps harder after the factory heat. You blink against the fog, which has grown heavier, like it's watching now. Lunch is a crust of bread, hard enough to knock a man out, soft enough to chew if you have the right teeth. You don't. You chew slowly. It helps pass the time. Someone shares a cup of tea. It tastes of smoke and tin. You savor it anyway. Warm liquid in cold hands is its own kind of magic. Then the bell rings again. Back inside, back to the stool, the needle, the wheel, the same motions, the same light. You feel your head nod once, just once. You jerk upright. Blink. Your fingers slipped. Nothing damaged, not yet. But you know the rule, don't sleep. Not even for a breath, you keep going. Slower now, but steadier. The machines click. The woman next to you mutters something under her breath. A name, maybe. A prayer. Maybe both. Someone sneezes. You stitch. Someone cries out. Short, sharp. Then silence. You don't look up. You don't want to see. The bell will ring when it's time. Hours pass. Or maybe just one. You've stopped counting. Your fingers bleed slightly. Not from injury, just from repetition. The skin wears thin, the thread pulls tight. You don't mention it. You keep going. Finally, the last bell, you stand again, this time faster. Not because you feel better, just because you want to leave. You slip out, back into the fog, the grayness, the sound of your own breath. The sky is darker now. Late afternoon, but it could be night. The light here isn't honest. You walk slower now, not because you want to, because your legs refuse anything else. You pass the same stalls, the same boots, the same cold stares. A woman tries to sell you apples. You shake your head. She moves on. You see someone asleep in a doorway. Their coat is thinner than yours. Their hands are blue. You don't stop. You reach your building. Your steps echo up the stairs. The hallway is darker than before. The candle stub still flickers on the mantel. You reach the room. The door opens without resistance. Inside, everything is as you left it. Someone snoring softly. Someone else coughs. You sit on the floor. Slowly, carefully. You pull your boots off. The soles are worse than this morning. You lie down. No pillow tonight, just folded arms. You listen to the wind outside, to the pipe dripping in the corner, to the rhythm of someone breathing beside you, to the faint scratching of the rat near the hearth. You close your eyes and you wonder if you'll do it all again tomorrow, if the fog will lift, if the machines will spare your fingers, if your stomach will feel full, if you'll ever breathe air that doesn't. A taste of smoke and sweat and coal. But then again, you're already asleep, and tomorrow will come whether you want it to or not. You wake before the bell. You don't open your eyes just yet. The cot beneath you creaks when you move, and the woman on the other side of the frame hasn't stirred. You wait. Let your breath ease into the rhythm of the cold. It's always cold here, not sharp or angry, just there. Always. A weight behind your eyes and in your bones. The workhouse doesn't believe in comfort. That's the point. You're not supposed to like it. The bell rings, not a pleasant sound, just metal on metal. Rushed, indifferent. You swing your legs over the edge. The floor is stone cold. Of course, you don't flinch, not anymore. There are no windows in your dormitory, not really, just small openings near the ceiling, too high to reach. The light that trickles in is grey. It tells you what you already know. Another long, slow day. The other women begin to rise. One coughs into a handkerchief. Another mutters something, maybe a prayer, maybe not. You dress quickly. The uniform is coarse, heavy, brown wool, made not to fit, but to cover. It scratches. It doesn't smell of anything in particular. That's something you've stopped noticing. You file out of the room, following the others. No one speaks. Words aren't banned, but they're discouraged. There's no one here who wants to listen, and no one here who hasn't said it all before. The matron waits at the end of the corridor. Clipboard, watchful eyes. A black bonnet tied too tightly. She nods once. You nod back. Breakfast is served in silence. You sit at the bench. The wooden seat is hard and slightly damp. The porridge in your bowl is pale and thin. Oats and water, boiled into a paste. It's hot, though, and you're thankful for that. You eat without tasting. You chew because that's what's next. The woman beside you has cracked lips. You notice. You say nothing. One girl doesn't finish her portion. The matron sees. She's made to stand. Just stand until the meal is done. That's how they do things here. You don't waste, not food, not time, not breath. When the bowls are cleared, you're led to the washroom. Here is where your real work begins. If you're young and strong, they'll put you on laundry duty. Not the nice kind. Not folding or sorting or tending to buttons. No, you boil, you scrub. You lift heavy wet linen until your arms go numb and your back forgets what straight feels like. The air is thick, steamy. The walls drip. You don't sweat anymore. Your body has adjusted, your fingers swell, then prune, then crack, and still you keep going. Others are sent to the kitchen, some to sewing rooms, a few to scrub the halls, their hands wrapped in rags to shield them from the scouring lye. But no one escapes the labor. You work until the bell rings again. That's mid-morning. You don't sit down. You just change tasks. You're assigned to ironing now, heavy irons heated by coal. You must move quickly. Not too quickly. Just enough not to burn, but not enough to slow down. If you pause, the matron taps her book. She never yells. She doesn't need to. The workhouse isn't cruel out loud. It saves its cruelty for the space between things. Your thoughts wander. That's dangerous. You bring them back, to the hemline, to the fold, to the warmth of the handle in your palm. Someone drops an iron. It cracks the stone floor. The sound echoes. The girl who dropped it goes still. Nothing happens right away. That's worse. Later, she'll be reassigned. Something harder. No one speaks to her. Not because they blame her, because they can't afford to notice. You finish your stack. You don't ask for more. You're sent outside instead. Yard duty, sweeping, piling, sorting. The cold air hits your face. It feels like punishment and reward all at once. You look up, briefly. The sky is pale, white-grey, the kind that promises snow but never delivers. Just damp and chill. You sweep leaves that don't belong to anyone. You scrape mud from a path no one uses. You work until the bell rings again. Lunch. It's the same routine, the same bench, the same bowl. Sometimes it's potatoes, sometimes broth, rarely meat. Today it's bread, rough, dense, dry in the mouth. You chew slowly. The girl from earlier is still silent. She hasn't been reassigned yet. That's almost worse. You drink your tea, weak, lukewarm. You close your eyes for just a moment and then you're back on your feet. This time you're in the mending room. They trust you with needles again. You repair torn coats, stitch buttons, patch elbows and knees. Your fingers are stiff. The thread snaps once. You tie it again. Someone is crying in the next room. Quietly. You keep sewing. You hum a tune in your head. You don't dare hum out loud. Someone would notice. And then it would be your turn to stand. The hours drag and the light dims. Not much light, but enough to tell you the day is dying. You're allowed to stop. But only just. Dinner comes in a tin. Bowl, it's a stew. Barely. You think you find a bean. You eat slowly. You don't speak. No one does. After dinner, you're sent to chapel. The benches there are hard, too. But at least the candles smell nice. The hymn is familiar. You mouth the words. You don't sing. Your voice belongs to the workhouse now. Afterward, you return to your dormitory. You undress. You fold your uniform. You lie down. The same cot, the same smell, the same shape in the ceiling above you. Someone turns in their sleep. Someone else breathes through their mouth. The sound is soft, almost like the sea. You don't cry. Not anymore. You think about tomorrow and the next. You wonder if your hands will hold out another winter. You wonder if the matron was ever a girl like you. You wonder if you will ever leave. But the wondering doesn't last long, because you're tired, and the stone floor won't get softer, and the porridge won't get thicker, and the bell will still ring in the dark. So you close your eyes. You close your eyes, and let the silence cover you. The bell rings again. You wake up the way you always do, quietly, fully, all at once. There's no time for slow mornings here, no time for stretching or sighing or wondering what day it is. You already know it's the same one, over again. You rise before anyone tells you, not because you're eager, because it's easier that way. You've been here long enough to learn the rhythm. You know how to move when the matron isn't watching. You know how to finish your porridge before it thickens to paste. You know how to keep your eyes down, your hands busy, your thoughts thin. There's no law against speaking. But that's not the same as permission. Words are used sparingly here, like sugar or trust. You scrub your hands with cold water before work begins. The basin smells of metal and lye. There's only one towel, and it's always damp. You pat your fingers dry and wipe the rest on your apron. The others do the same. Today you're assigned to laundry again. The heavy barrels, the fire that never burns quite clean, the soap that stings the tiny cuts already forming at the base of your nails. It smells sharp, like boiled things, like effort, like nothing. You stir the sheets with a wooden paddle. You don't rush, you don't slow, you find the rhythm, your arms ache, you let them. The pain is small now. It used to be worse. The women beside you don't speak, they move like you. Elbows bent just so, hands knotted around tools like they're holding on to something more than wood and cloth. One of them, the girl with the dark hair and the hollow eyes, drops a sheet. It lands in the soot. She doesn't curse, she doesn't panic, she just picks it up again and starts over. That's how it works here. Mistakes aren't punished loudly. But they aren't forgotten either. There are no second chances, only longer hours. The forewoman walks past. Her shoes click in a precise rhythm. Her skirt barely brushes the floor. Her eyes scan everything, everyone. You don't meet her gaze. If she pauses beside your tub, you keep stirring. If she keeps walking, you count that as grace. Later you'll be sent to the sewing room again. The light in that room is better, but it lies. It makes you think there's a world outside, that it's afternoon or almost spring. But the windows are high and the air smells of mothballs and cotton dust. You mend a coat, one of many. You aren't told whose it is, but you imagine it anyway. You imagine a man wearing it, walking down a street you've never seen, tipping his hat to someone. Maybe whistling. You stitch faster. The coat is too heavy for you. The sleeves are thick. The needle bends once. You bite your lip and try again. Someone next to you hums. It's soft, barely there. A nursery tune, a lullaby maybe. No one tells her to stop. That's the closest thing to kindness today. In the afternoon, you help fold bandages. You aren't allowed to ask why. But the sight of bloodstains in the corners tells you enough. You fold each strip precisely twice long ways, once again, stacked in threes. The matron checks each pile. If they're wrong, she doesn't scold you. She just takes the pile away and makes you start again. You don't make the same mistake twice. You break for tea. It's weaker than yesterday. That means the leaves were reused. You don't complain. Not out loud. You don't even think it fully. You just sip. The bell rings. Again, this time it's for chapel. It's not Sunday, but there's a visitor, a man in clean shoes and a suit with buttons that match. He says kind things. He says it's good that you're here. He says the workhouse is a blessing. He says the labor builds character. You sit on the bench and try to disappear into the wood. He doesn't see you. Not really. He sees what he wants to see. He quotes scripture about humility. He talks about the virtue of poverty. He says that someday, if you work hard and stay obedient, God will reward you. He doesn't mention when or how. After chapel, you are returned to the hall. A fresh stack of linens waits. No one says it, but everyone sees the same thing. There's more today, more than usual. Someone must have come in sick. That means more work. That means someone else might not come back. But you don't say it. You just fold. 2 corners together, then smooth the edge. Then, the next fold. You know the rhythm, you move within it. Dinner is quiet again, you chew slowly, someone passes you a crust. They had 2. You nod. It means everything. After dinner you help clean, not because you're told, because it's your day. You sweep. You wring out a mop. You wipe a sill with a damp rag that used to be white. And then, finally, the last bell. It doesn't sound tired, but you are. You return to your dormitory. You undress. You fold your apron. You sit on the edge of the cot a moment longer than usual. Your feet ache. Your back doesn't feel like part of your body anymore. You stretch your fingers. They shake a little. The girl with the dark hair lies, 2 cots over. She's already asleep. You envy her for that. You lie back. The ceiling above you hasn't changed. It never does. But tonight it feels lower somehow, closer. You close your eyes. You try not to think about tomorrow, but it's already there, pressed against the inside of your ribs, waiting for the next bell. You'd think that after 12, maybe 14 hours of unbroken labor, your body would fall into sleep the moment your head touches the cot, that you'd collapse, grateful, for a few hours off your feet and out of your apron. But that's not quite how it works in the workhouse. Here, the end of the workday doesn't mean the beginning of rest. Not really. It means cold stone floors, stiff wool blankets, shared beds if you're unlucky, and the faint, inescapable sounds of 50 people trying not to cry too loud. And even if you do sleep, it's never deep, never safe, not in here. By the time the evening bell rings, your body doesn't hurt in any specific place. It just hums with a dull, shapeless ache that settles in your spine and behind your eyes. You line up with the others, hands folded, posture straight. Not because anyone feels particularly obedient, but because the routine is safer than not following it. After a while, obedience stops feeling like submission and starts feeling like muscle memory. You don't resist the rhythm because you don't have to think inside it. It carries you. You shuffle to your dormitory with the other women. The room is long and narrow with rows of iron-framed beds packed tight. If you're lucky, you get one to yourself. Most nights you're not lucky. You climb under the covers, such as they are. One thin blanket, a straw-stuffed sack for a mattress, and a pillow that crunches slightly when you lie back. You don't ask what's inside it. No one does. You wrap your shawl around your shoulders because the windows don't shut fully and the air still bites at your face. One of the panes rattles just enough to keep you company, along with the occasional cough from the bed next to yours and the low muttering of someone stuck halfway between. Exhaustion and dreaming. There are no bedtime stories here, no candles or nightlights, just darkness, and the sort of silence that isn't quite silence, the kind full of breathing and creaking wood, and the quiet shuffle of someone making one last trip to the chamber pot in the corner. You lie still and stare at the ceiling, where the plaster has started to crack into something resembling a map. You could almost imagine you're someplace else if the smell didn't keep reminding you you're not. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow. Your dreams are filled with fabric and soap suds and cold tea. You dream of folding linens and sweeping endless corridors that stretch further the more you clean. You dream of the matron's shoes clicking behind you. You dream of dropping a plate, of spilling the water, of someone asking you your name and you not remembering what it is. Sometimes someone screams in their sleep, not loud, just enough to make everyone shift and go still again. No one talks about it in the morning. You learn very quickly here that talking about fear makes it too real, and real things are the kind that get punished. Besides, everyone has their own bad dreams, and there's not enough energy left in anyone to carry someone else's too. And the worst part, you get used to it. You get used to the stone floor under your feet in the morning, cold and unforgiving. You get used to washing your face in water that might have been cleaned 3 people ago. You get used to stale bread and watery porridge, to buttons that don't match and uniforms that don't fit. You get used to silence in the sewing room, to the weight of an iron in your hand, to the way soap burns when it seeps into tiny cuts. You forgot were there. You even get used to the stares, the way the matron watches you, eyes like tight-drawn thread, and the way she nods slightly when you do things correctly. Not praise, just acknowledgement. You live for those nods. They're the only reward you're going to get, and yet somehow in all of it there's still a sliver of something. Maybe it's habit, maybe it's resilience, or maybe it's just the tiny rebellions you carry inside your head, like a pocket you're not supposed to have. A half-remembered song. The warmth of someone slipping you a second biscuit when no one's looking. The way the girl 2 beds down whispers a joke once a week. Never more than one. The fact that you still breathe on cold mornings, even when the frost sneaks across the walls. You count your breaths sometimes. It gives them weight, proof that you're still here. You're still here. But make no mistake, this place doesn't want you to be a person. It wants you to be a function, a task with hands, a name on a list, something that sews and scrubs and listens. It's not here to help. The workhouse was never built for kindness. It was built as a warning, a deterrent, a sharp lesson in the consequences of poverty, the kind of place designed to remind the poor that they should feel grateful for even the most miserable charity. And if you think that's just politics or paperwork, spend one night here and see how many times you wake up shivering. Outside, the city keeps moving. Gas lamps flicker. Carriages clatter past the gates. Someone in a warm house yawns and turns over in bed, wrapped in quilts, and unaware that 50 yards away, someone is scraping candle wax off the floor because a drop fell, and the rules say, spills are a mark of carelessness. You learn to clean faster than you learn to read, not because it's easier, but because there's no margin for error. Inside, someone is sick. You can hear it. The cough started 3 nights ago and it hasn't stopped. You know what that means. They won't say it out loud, but the matron has already moved her to the end of the dormitory, further from the others, just in case. You don't ask what comes next, you just start working faster, because when someone leaves, there's more work to cover. And still, in the middle of it all, people survive. They form tiny friendships, quiet ones, nothing too loud, nothing that draws attention. Maybe it's just sharing a coat. Maybe it's just holding a hand under the blanket during prayers. Maybe it's nothing more than standing slightly closer to someone who smells like home. But those little things matter. More than the rules. More than the porridge. There, what people hold on to when the lights go out. Even in a place like this, no one's ever really alone. You may not be allowed to talk, but you still breathe, and you still notice. And sometimes, on a rare night when the matron forgets to check your bunk, and no one screams in their sleep, and the fire in the laundry didn't go out early, sometimes you find something like peace, not comfort, not rest, but stillness. And that's enough. You pull the blanket tighter, you shift to your side, your knees ache, you let them. You stare at the ceiling, and for a moment, you imagine that, outside somewhere, there's a world that smells like lavender soap and fresh bread, where people wear dresses that fit and drink tea from porcelain, and beds have pillows filled with feathers, not straw. You don't believe it exists, but you let yourself imagine it anyway, because even in the workhouse, even in the cold and the quiet and the endless days that blur into nights, the mind finds its own kind of rebellion. It imagines, it dreams, it remembers how to be human, and then the bell rings and it starts all over again. Now it's easy to think of a strike as a big dramatic thing, marches, megaphones, placards waving in the air. But this wasn't that kind of strike. Not yet. Not in 1888. Not for girls barely out of childhood, working 14-hour days for pennies while slowly being poisoned. What the match girls did wasn't grand. It was quieter than that. But in many ways it was braver. It started, as these things often do, with one incident too many. A girl named Eliza, or sometimes it's Mary, depending on which paper you read, was fired. No explanation, just shown the door. The other girls knew why, though. She'd spoken up. She'd talked to someone outside the factory about conditions inside. And just like that, she was gone. That should have been the end. Of it. Usually was. Someone disappears and the rest fall quiet again. That's how the system works. But not this time. The other girls stood up, refused to work, refused to sit, refused to accept that silence was their only option. There were around 1,400 women and girls working at Bryant and May at the time. Over. So 200 of them walked out. No union, no funding, no strike pay. Just empty stomachs and clenched teeth. They didn't walk far, just outside the factory gates. But even that was enough to turn heads. Girls weren't supposed to protest, certainly. Not working-class girls. Not ones with soot under their nails and half a shilling to their name. But they stood there anyway, skirts dusty, arms crossed, eyes forward. And London noticed. They weren't loud, but they were visible. Hundreds of them, dressed in patched clothing, lining the edge of the street. They didn't chant. They didn't sing. They just refused to go back in. The foreman panicked. Orders weren't getting filled, boxes weren't getting shipped. Bryant and May had customers to keep happy. And so, for the first time, someone tried to negotiate. It wasn't the factory owners who spoke to them at first. It was Annie Besant, a writer, political activist, and all-around thorn in the side of polite Victorian society. She was middle class, educated, and completely furious. She'd already been publishing articles about factory conditions, and now she had a story with faces, real ones. She met with the girls, listened to them, wrote down everything, their wages, their hours, the sickness, the fines. She published an article titled "White Slavery in London." It hit like a match to dry straw. Suddenly everyone had an opinion. The press was split. Some called the girls heroes. Others said they were liars, ungrateful, or being manipulated. Bryant and May, eager to protect their reputation, denied everything. They claimed the girls were treated well, paid fairly, that no one had ever been punished unfairly or fallen ill from the chemicals. Meanwhile, more girls collapsed from exhaustion, and Fossey Jaw continued to quietly claim faces. The strike dragged on. Days turned to weeks. There was no strike fund, no union office, just girls trying to make a point while living on almost nothing. Some relied on charity, some skipped meals. Some were already weak from years of work, and the hunger didn't help. But they held the line. They kept showing up outside the factory gates in the same clothes with the same faces, still not shouting, just standing, and bit by bit the tide turned. There were public meetings now. People donated what they could. A few journalists showed up, even some politicians. The pressure began to build. Bryant and May couldn't keep denying things when every paper in London was publishing the girls' stories. It wasn't just about a few sick workers anymore. It was about pride, about the right to speak, about what kind of city London wanted to be. Eventually, the factory caved. They met with a delegation of the girls. That alone was unheard of. Working-class women being allowed to speak for themselves in a formal setting? Revolutionary. The girls asked for simple things: better pay, no more unfair fines, safer working conditions, and the freedom to organize. Nothing outrageous. Just dignity. Just the right to work without being punished for existing. And somehow, incredibly, they got it. Bryant and May agreed to many of the demands. The fines were removed, wages slightly improved. The company promised to look into better safety protocols, including ending the use of white phosphorus, though that wouldn't come until years later. Still, it was a win, a real one. Not a full transformation, but something they could feel in their hands. And for the first time, maybe ever, those hands weren't shaking from fear. It's easy to overlook what they did, to say it was just a small strike at a small factory. But in 1888, this was unheard of. Teenage girls, many of them barely literate, stood up to one of the largest employers in East London and won. They didn't have titles, they didn't have speeches, they just had the truth, and the ability to stand still when it mattered. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand. These weren't activists. Not at first. They were workers, survivors, girls who cleaned their hands with cold water and braided their hair with fingers stained from chemicals. Girls who were used to being forgotten. And still they made themselves heard. After the strike ended, most of the girls went back to work. Some stayed at Bryant and May. Some moved on. A few became involved in union organizing. Many just faded back into the city, into the noise, into the blur of names that history tends to forget. Their faces weren't carved into statues, no medals, no parades, but what they did rippled outward. Other workers noticed, other factories paid attention. The idea that even the poorest, youngest, least powerful people in the system could say no and be heard didn't vanish. It grew, quietly, like something smoldering, like a spark waiting for dry timber. And that's what they were. Spark, not a revolution, not a firestorm, just a match. One lit by tired hands, trembling with cold and hunger, but steady all the same. The match girls went back to work. That's how it ended. No final parade, no headlines a year later. Just a quiet return to the long tables, the cold benches, the piles of wooden sticks soaked in danger. Because the thing about winning when you're poor is that winning doesn't mean leaving. It means staying, but with your head a little higher. Some of the girls were hired back under better terms. No more random fines, a promise of improved safety. Their wages were still low, but now they could keep most of them. and that mattered. That made the difference between one loaf of bread and two, between coal for the stove or another night shivering under thin blankets. It wasn't salvation, but it was a start. Still, the phosphorus was there. Even after the strike, Bryant and May didn't stop using white phosphorus right away. That would take years, even decades. You could call that a failure, and many did. But the girls knew better. They'd cracked something, not the factory, not the system, but the silence, and silence was everything in Victorian London. Victorian London. If you were a working-class woman, or just a woman really, your job was to be quiet, to endure, to smile when smiled at, and bow your head when spoken to. There were no microphones for you, no platforms, just a long line of people who believed your life was worth less than your labor. The match girls broke that line. Not by shouting, but by standing still and saying, "We're not doing this anymore." It took a toll, of course. Courage always does. Some of the girls lost their jobs. For good. Some were blacklisted, quietly, passed over by other factories, too scared to hire a troublemaker. Others found work elsewhere. But the stain of rebellion clung. A few got out, married, moved, disappeared into better lives, or at least different ones. But most stayed right where they were. Bow, East London, coal dust in the curtains, rats under the stairs, the sound of coughing behind the thin walls of tenement housing. The sickness didn't stop either. Girls kept falling ill. Fossey. Jaw didn't care about protests. It just kept rotting bones and breaking faces. Even as the company promised change, it moved slowly. And the law didn't catch up until years later, when enough outrage and death piled up to make Parliament flinch. In 1908, Britain finally banned white phosphorus in matches, 2 full decades after the strike. But that's the thing about justice. It's often slow, and it rarely shows up for the people who needed it most. The match girls didn't live to see themselves called pioneers. They weren't handed trophies. They weren't included in history books for a long, long time. Most died young, from disease, or overwork, or just the slow erosion of hard living. We know a few names: Annie, Eliza, Kate, but most were never written down. Their stories slipped between the cracks of official record-keeping, like coal dust under a factory door. Still, the ripple of what they did spread. Quietly. Their strike helped inspire the rise of women's labor unions in Britain. It showed that girls with nothing but worn boots and burned fingers could still stand together, and people remembered that. Years later, when the suffragettes marched or when garment workers downed tools in protest, the memory of the match girls was there. Not as a headline, but as a whisper, a reminder that small voices, when gathered, become hard to ignore. It's easy to look back now and see it all as a story, a neat little arc: oppression, protest, resolution. But if you were one of those girls, there was nothing neat about it. There was fear, hunger, cold. The risk of being tossed aside forever because you dared to speak. Courage wasn't abstract. It was practical. And the cost of it was counted in lost wages, sleepless nights, and the slow, aching worry that maybe you'd made a mistake. But they didn't. Because somewhere between the phosphorus and the pain, between the fines and the coughing and the hunger, they had the clarity to say, "We deserve better." And for a moment, just long enough, the world heard them. That's what makes the match girls extraordinary. Not that they won, but that they believed they could. And they did it all while poor, while young, while female, while dismissed. They didn't kick down doors, they didn't riot. They didn't wait for someone to speak on their behalf. They spoke quietly and refused to stop until someone listened. It's worth thinking about that, especially now as you drift towards sleep, safe in a world where matches don't burn your bones and factory work doesn't mean breathing poison. We owe that in some small part to them, not just to the laws they helped spark, but to the idea that no one is too small to matter, that even the quietest girls, even the most boring lives, can shift the weight of the world. If only by an inch. You might not remember their names, you might forget the exact year, but the next time you strike a match and see that little flash of light, think of them. Think of the girls who made it, who boxed it, who bled for it, and then refused to be invisible any longer. If you're still awake, we're going to visit a place that doesn't often show up in history books with glossy pages or clean diagrams. No kings or queens today. Just smoke, sweat, and the kind of cold that sinks straight through your bones. Tonight we're going to Manchester. Not the modern city with universities and rail stations, but the Manchester of soot, machines, and little children working 12 hours before they've even lost their baby teeth. You open your eyes in the dark. But really, you never fully close them. You don't have a bed. Just a pile of scratchy rags in the corner near the chimney, and the chimney doesn't even work right. It leaks soot and cold wind. You're small, 6, maybe 7 years old, and the first thing you feel is damp. Your feet are wet from the floor, always wet. You're shivering and your fingers are already stiff. But you've got to get up. The horn will sound soon, and if you're late, the foreman takes it out of your pay. If you fall behind too many times, he just stops calling your name in the morning. And that means you're done. Done means no wages. No wages means no bread. And if your mother's too weak to work today, that might be the difference between food and nothing, so you rise quietly. You don't want to wake the others, and not out of kindness, but because if they stir too soon, the whole room starts coughing. Everyone coughs, all the time. The air in your house is bad, but it's paradise. Compared to what's waiting at the mill, you pull on your shirt, stiff from yesterday's sweat and smoke, and tug your trousers over your skinny legs. There's no time for shoes, and you're not sure where they even are. They might be on your brother's feet, out the door, into the grey. Morning in Manchester doesn't come with golden skies or singing birds. It comes with fog that's not really fog. It's smoke from a dozen factories, thick and low. It gets in your hair, your throat, your eyes. You walk fast because standing still makes you colder. Past rows of crumbling brick, crooked chimneys and alleys full of ash. You hear someone retching in the shadows, that's normal. You keep moving. You reach the mill before the sun has shown its face. It rarely does. The building looms like a prison, tall, windowed and loud. The noise is constant, even before you step inside. A mechanical heartbeat that never stops. Inside it's worse. The foreman's voice barks. You line up, you're smaller than most, which makes you valuable. You can reach between the looms, under the machines, places the grown-ups can't go without crawling. You start by sweeping, always sweeping. Not with a proper broom, just a stick with rags tied around the end. You crawl under the looms, where the dust is thickest, cotton floating in the air like snow, but it burns when it lands in your nose. You've learned not to sneeze too hard. The noise might startle someone, and if a worker slips, the machine keeps going. It never stops. Neither can you. The hours stretch. You don't count them in numbers anymore. You count them in blisters, in burns, in how many times the bell hasn't rung yet. You can't hear much anyway as the machines roar louder than thunder. They drown out everything. You've seen children go deaf here, not all at once, but gradually. You feel it too, a dullness in your ears, a hum that never leaves even after you're outside again. That hum becomes part of you. Sometimes your fingers bleed. That's normal too. The spindles spin fast, and if you're not quick enough, they slice skin. You've got 10 fingers. You can lose one and still be useful, that's what the foreman says. You've seen a boy lose 2 in 1 week. He got half a day off and a halfpenny docked from his pay for the trouble. He came back wearing a bandage made from his mother's apron. There's no lunch break. Just a 10-minute pause when the overseer looks away and you shove stale bread in your mouth with dirty hands. It doesn't matter. The bread tastes like lint anyway. You eat fast, drink a sip of water that smells faintly of oil, and go back. To it, if your mother works in the same mill, you don't see her. She's in a different room, louder and hotter where the steam presses are. If she's not coughing today, that's a blessing. If she is, you don't ask. She still has to finish her shift. Everyone does. The floor is slippery with grease and sweat. You fall at least once every day. You don't cry anymore. It takes too much energy. And anyway, it's loud enough that no one would hear you. You stop thinking about the world outside, about parks or books or the smell of clean air. Those are for other people. People who live in houses with windows you can see through. People who don't count their meals by factory bells. You forget what grass feels like. You forget what it's like to breathe without coughing afterward. Time passes. It must. But you don't see the sun. Not once, not all day. The only light is gaslight flickering dimly in the corners. You squint and your eyes ache, but you've learned how to work half blind. Most of you have. And then finally, just as your legs feel like giving out, just as your hands start to tremble too much to hold the sweeping stick. The bell rings. Not freedom. Just the signal that this shift is over. You don't feel relief, just a kind of numbness, like your body knows it survived, but it isn't sure it wants to again tomorrow. You walk home slower, not because you want to, because you can't go any faster. The smoke still hangs over the street, thick and yellowish now. Someone's collapsed on the curb. No one checks if they're dead. That's just the city. And when you crawl back into your pile of rags, too tired to eat, too sore to cry, you think, not in words but in something deeper, that this can't be what childhood was meant to be. But for you, this is it. And tomorrow, it starts again. It starts again. You're back on your feet before your legs are ready. There's a kind of soreness that doesn't go away with sleep. Not that you get much of that anyway. You ache in places you don't know how to name, and your hands still smell faintly, like grease and old cotton, even though you've scrubbed them in the wash basin until the skin went raw. But there's no time to rest. The horn sounds low and ugly. It means it's time to go back to the mill, and so you do. You stop wondering what day it is. They all feel the same. Work, walk, sleep, repeat. There's no school, no games, no sun-warmed. Cobblestones to run across barefoot like in the stories. Just smoke, soot, and the slow wear of days that turn your small body into something twisted by labor. The streets are already busy, and most of the people walking look just like you. Thin, bent slightly forward, arms pressed to sides like it helps them stay warm. You can tell the children apart from the adults only by size, not by expression. No one smiles. No one ever does. The mill is waiting. It's always waiting. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't care, and it never forgets. You hear it before you see it. A deep thrumming noise that vibrates in your chest like thunder coming from inside your own ribs. By now it feels like part of you. A second heartbeat, but colder. Inside, the air hits you like a wall. It's thick with cotton fibers and dust and something else. Something chemical, maybe. The overseers don't say what it is, they just shout, louder than the machines, telling you to move faster, to keep your fingers straight, to stop dragging your feet. You nod, or maybe you don't. It doesn't matter. Your body already knows the steps. Your job today is spinning. That means you're standing near a frame that moves whether you're ready or not. You guide threads, watch for snags, and when something goes wrong, and it always goes wrong, you dive in. Small hands are good for this. They reach between the belts and wheels where grown-up hands would get caught. Children lose fingers. You've seen it. You've smelled it. That coppery tang that's not quite the same as a nosebleed. You've helped wrap a cloth around someone's wrist when it happened. The overseer gave them 2 hours off, then back to work. There's no protective gear, no gloves, no masks, no ear coverings, just your own thin shirt and whatever you can manage with your sleeves rolled up. The noise is unbearable, but you've learned to tune it out. Mostly, except at night when it comes back in your dreams, rattling through your head like iron on iron. Sometimes your hand slips. Sometimes the cotton whips your wrist, or a belt snags your sleeve, and you have to yank back fast before the machine takes you with it. You've learned to move quickly, quietly, precisely. Mistakes hurt, and not just physically. If you break something, it comes out of your pay. That means less food. That means someone else at home doesn't eat either. It's not just your body on the line. It's your whole family. You know the other kids in your section by sight and breath. And movement, not by name. You don't talk, it's too loud, and besides, what would you even say? You're all here for the same reason. Because your fathers died in the mines, or your mothers are too sick to scrub floors, or because someone needed a wage and you were the only one left with working limbs. There's a boy next to you, no older than 9, who hasn't spoken since. His sister died last month. She was crushed between a cart and the wall on the factory floor. It happened fast. The mill didn't stop. It never stops. They cleaned up her body while the machines kept running. Someone else had to sweep that corner the next hour. No time to grieve, no time to understand. The boy just showed up the next day and kept working, because what else could he do? When your lunch break comes, if it comes, it's not really a break. 10 minutes maybe, 15 if the machines haven't jammed. You sit on the ground, back against the cold wall, hands shaking as you unwrap a piece of bread from a rag. That used to be clean, it's stale, hard at the edges. You chew without thinking, you don't taste anything anymore. Sometimes you trade bites with another kid, half a crust for a swig of tea, not because it tastes good, just because it's warm. The air feels tighter after lunch, heavier, like it's learned how tired you are. You keep your head down and your hands moving, hoping today won't be the day something breaks. You've started coughing lately. Dry, raspy and low. It hurts deep in your chest. You know what it means. Everyone knows the black cough. The slow drowning. But you keep quiet. You have to. If you show signs of illness, they might send you home. And home means nothing if there's no work to pay for it. The overseer passes by with his usual scowl. His stick taps against the floor. As he walks sharp and fast, some children flinch, others keep moving like they didn't see him. No one makes eye contact. He doesn't speak much, just grunts or barks commands. Once you saw him drag a girl by her collar for slowing down. She didn't come back the next day. No one asked what happened. You wanted to, but fear is a heavy thing. It lives in your stomach like a stone. And then there are the stairs. Once, a day you carry bundles upstairs, tightly packed cotton wrapped in burlap. They're heavy, heavier than you. You take the steps slow, knees wobbling, fingers slipping. You pray, not to a god, not really, but to whatever part of the wall might hold you up if you fall. You reach the top, legs shaking, and drop the bundle with a thud. No praise, just a grunt and another order. Sometimes you see the sky through the windows, a thin strip of grey that might once have been blue. You try to imagine what it would look like without smoke, without chimneys, without soot falling like snow. You've heard stories of fields, trees, birds. You wonder if they're real or if they're just things people make up to keep children quiet. You want to believe in grass. You really do, but belief is a luxury, and you're not rich enough to afford it. Hours pass, time loses meaning, and still the machines spin. Your body feels like it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the mill, to the floor, to the smoke and the wheels and the endless noise. You keep moving, because you must, because stopping isn't allowed, because no one notices if a child disappears here, unless it means the machines stop turning. By the time the horn finally groans its last sound, your body is no longer just tired. It's something else entirely. Numb but still aching. The kind of weariness that sinks into your bones and makes you feel like you were born old. The machines slow down, and not stop, they never really stop, but shift into their night rhythm. Still grinding, still groaning, just without you. For now. You don't run when the doors open. You don't have the energy. You just walk, like a ghost, like the rest of them. A line of soot-streaked children and bent-backed women shuffling into the smog-heavy dark. The air outside isn't fresh, not at this hour. It's colder, maybe, but the smoke hangs thicker near the chimneys where the fires are being stoked for the night. It burns in your nose and clings to your skin. You wipe your face with your sleeve, but that only smears the soot deeper. Your hands are trembling again. Not from fear, not even from cold, just from how much you've asked them to do. One finger won't bend properly. You caught it on a spindle early this morning and it's already turning dark at the joint. You don't tell anyone, it won't matter. It's still attached and that means it still works, that's good enough. The streets of Manchester are quieter now, but not silent. Carts still creak along the cobbles. You hear the occasional clang of metal, a door slamming, the shout of a man too drunk to know if he's angry or just lost. You keep your eyes down. Children who look too long get noticed. Getting noticed is dangerous. You pass the butcher shop, closed for the day. The blood in the gutter is fresh. No one scrubs it away. You sidestep a pile of rotted vegetables near the curb, not because it smells, you're used to that, but because there might be something hidden beneath it. Rats, glass, needles. Once you stepped on a nail near the tannery and limped for a week. You still have the scar. You count it among the others. Not because you're proud, but because it reminds you what you've survived. Home, if you can call it that, is a single room up 3 flights of uneven stairs. The building sways when the wind blows too hard, and the walls are damp enough to grow mold in summer. But it's dry tonight, that's something. You knock once before opening the door. Not for privacy, there's no such thing, but to make sure nothing's gone wrong while you were away. Your mother is sitting near the hearth. Not close. The fire is too small to warm more than a few inches in any direction. She's coughing. into a rag. You can tell by the way she hides it that there's blood in it. You've seen that rag before, folded carefully, washed when possible. She thinks hiding the red spots means you're safe from worry. You pretend it works. Your sister lies on the floor bundled in 2 thin blankets. She didn't go to the mill today, fever again. She's barely eaten in 2 days. You hand your mother your wages, a few coins pressed into a palm that feels thinner than yesterday, and she nods without looking. She doesn't say thank you, she never does. Not because she isn't grateful, because words like that don't fit into lives like yours. They'd sound foreign, maybe even foolish. So you just sit near the window, even though it doesn't open, and breathe through your mouth to avoid the smell of damp bedding, unwashed bodies, and mold. You eat your portion of bread slowly. It's hard, almost rock-like at the edges, but it's warm from your coat pocket. You chew each bite until it's soft enough to swallow without noticing the taste. There's no light but the hearth. You squint to see. You don't remember what reading feels like, not that you ever really learned. The letters they taught, you at Sunday school, are fading. Replaced by numbers you count in halfpence and sick days, the room grows quieter. The city does not. Outside, someone screams. A dog barks. You hear boots on cobblestones, running, then silence again. You pull your knees to your chest and watch the shadows flicker across the ceiling. Sometimes you imagine there's something else. Clouds, maybe, or trees swaying. But you've never seen a real tree. Only the ones sketched in old shop signs, or carved into stone above buildings you're not allowed to enter. You lie down, wrapped in your coat instead of a blanket, and try not to think about the ache in your chest. It's there again, not sharp, just deep. You cough once, the dry kind. It rattles in your throat. You hope it's just from the dust. You tell yourself it is. You've seen what happens when the cough doesn't go away. Someone nearby dies every week. Old men who work too long. Young boys who didn't work fast enough. Mothers who gave too much of themselves, and babies born too small to start with. Death doesn't come with drama here. No sudden silence. Just a long absence that eventually gets noticed, and then forgotten. Another family moves in. Another body bends to the mill. You shift on the floor. The wood is cracked and cold, and your hip bones bruise from sleeping like this, but it's not the worst it's ever been. That was last winter, when the snow came in through the roof, and your fingers turned white at the tips. One of your friends lost 3 toes. She laughed about it, said now her shoes would last longer. You laughed too, but it didn't sound right. You're not asleep yet, but you're close. That space between wakefulness and dreaming, where your limbs grow heavy and your thoughts scatter like cotton dust in the air. You think about warm things, or try to. The bread cart that passes in the morning, the sound of church bells, that old man who played the fiddle on Market Street before the constables chased him off. You never heard music like that before or since. It felt like something different, something soft. But those thoughts drift too, replaced by numbers. How many days until payday? How many pennies to buy broth? How many steps from the mill to home and back again? You know them all by heart. That's your arithmetic. You close your eyes. The mill waits for you. So does the smoke. So do the men who measure your worth in how small your hands are and how quietly you bleed. But for now, just for these few hours, you breathe as best you can in a room with no air, wrapped in a silence that doesn't heal but at least doesn't hurt. And tomorrow when the horn sounds, you'll get up. Because there's no other choice, not for you, not for any child in Manchester. You ever had one of those summer days where everything feels a little off? The heat's a bit too heavy, the breeze smells a little too ripe, and people start wrinkling their noses for reasons they can't quite explain. Now take that feeling, multiply it by 1,000 and stretch it out over weeks. Welcome to London, summer of 1858. If you lived here, there was no getting around it. You didn't just smell it. You lived in it. They called it the Great. Stink, but that doesn't quite capture it. Great makes it sound epic or noble. This was more like a personal attack on your every breath. London by then was a city bursting at the seams, not just with people but with filth. The population had exploded. Houses were built on top of old cesspits. The Thames, meant to be the lifeblood of the city, had become its sewer, literally. Every drain, every toilet, every bucket of waste was funneled into the river. And when the summer heat hit in June, it didn't just sit, and it fermented. If you opened a window, the smell came in. If you closed it, the heat smothered you. Curtains soaked up the odor. Bedding held onto it. Your own clothes began to betray you. People walked around with handkerchiefs stuffed into their collars or pressed against their faces, soaked in vinegar or perfume, desperately trying to mask the reek. It didn't work. Nothing worked. The stink had teeth. It crawled up your nose, settled in your throat, and refused to leave. It wasn't the smell of something dying. It was the smell of everything already dead, mixed together, boiled in the sun, and ladled out by the breeze. And it didn't matter who you were. Rich or poor, merchant or maid, nobody got to opt out. The river didn't care if you had a title or a shilling. It just kept rolling on, thick and brown and sluggish. The newspapers called it an unendurable nuisance. Doctors blamed miasma, the bad air theory. And to be fair, standing near the river did make you feel like your lungs were trying to retreat down your throat. Breathing was a chore. Eating, that was another story. Food tasted different. Even tea started to smell like sewage. Imagine living in a city where boiled water can't save you. That was London, 1858. But here's the part that makes it worse. It wasn't new. The smell had been building for years. Londoners knew the Thames was foul. They joked about it. They wrote poems about it. People had been dumping human waste, animal carcasses, industrial runoff, and everything else into the river for generations. But in 1858, something shifted. That heat wave didn't just make it noticeable, it made it impossible to ignore. The city choked on itself. Every street near the water reeked. The stink seeped into the stone of the buildings, into the fabric of the city itself. People got creative. Lime was poured over sewage spots in the street. Curtains were soaked in. Carbolic acid. Trousers were stitched with sachets of lavender. One man even stuffed his nostrils with cotton soaked in rum. None of it helped. And the worst part? The city kept moving. You still had to go to work. You still had to sell goods. At the market, or sweep the floors, or empty the chamber pots, which, by the way, were often still dumped straight into the street. The stink wasn't just in the air, it was under you, around you, inside your walls. Imagine being a washerwoman in this city. You rise before dawn, fetch your water, boil it in a tin basin over a smoky fire, then scrub clothes that already smell, like the river they were washed in. You hang them to dry on lines stretched across alleys that stink like old meat and rotting bread. And when your fingers bleed from the soap and the labor, you rinse them in water that might very well give you an infection you don't survive. But you still do it, because laundry's due, it's always due. Or maybe you're a fishmonger working near the docks. Normally the smell of fish is strong. You're used to it. But now it's indistinguishable from the river. You can't tell what's spoiled and what's not. You gag every time you open a crate. Flies swarm faster. Customers hesitate longer. And you still have to sell it, because if you don't eat. The Thames has always been dirty, but now it's a weapon. A hot, wet wall of misery. That punishes everyone equally. Parliament noticed eventually, but we'll get to that in the next section. Right now, just imagine being you, not a politician, not a lord, just you, an average Londoner. You wake up in the morning to the sound of your neighbor coughing his lungs out in the next room. You take 2 steps toward the door and step in something wet. You don't ask what it is. You just wipe your foot on the nearest cloth and hope it's not the one you sleep with later. You go outside and immediately taste the air. Taste, that's the right word. The stink is so thick it coats your teeth. You try to breathe shallow. It doesn't help. You make it 3 blocks before the headache starts. 4 blocks, and the nausea kicks in. And the thing is, you get used to it. That's the darkest part. The human nose is remarkable. It adapts. After enough days of inhaling the stink of a dead river and 10,000 chamber pots, you stop flinching. You start thinking, it's normal. You start to believe the lie that this is just what life smells like. You go to bed with the stink, you dream in it. And when you wake up sweating at midnight, it's still there, wrapped around your pillow, soaking your hair, licking at the walls. Some families, if they could afford it, fled the city entirely. They escaped to the country, to the sea, anywhere. The air didn't smell like rot, but most people couldn't. Most people stayed, not because they were brave, because they were stuck, because where else would they go? Who would take them in? Who pays the rent if you run? So you stay, and the river stays, and the stink grows. But the thing about smells, especially the really awful ones, is that they start to mean something. They're not just a warning. Sometimes they're a prophecy. And this one didn't just signal decay, it was telling you that something was already deeply wrong. Because the Great Stink wasn't just a bad summer. It was a warning bell, and not everyone would survive what came next. So the stink didn't go away. Of course it didn't. But eventually it reached someone important's nose, and not just in passing. It hit them full in the face, right inside the halls of power. Because just across the street from the Thames sat the grand building of the Houses of Parliament. Beautiful architecture, big windows, high ceilings, all of it designed to impress, but none of it was built to keep out a city's decomposing river. By mid-June, the stench had seeped into the drapes, the floorboards, the leather chairs, and the lungs of lawmakers. The heat made everything worse. It warped the wood and boiled the river, which in turn sent up new clouds of sour fecal air. Debates were cut short, not because of political outrage, but because members of Parliament physically couldn't stay in the chamber. They gagged. They wrapped their faces in cloths soaked in disinfectant. Some suggested moving the entire government to the countryside. This is where it gets surreal. The men who could have fixed the city's sewage problems decades earlier were now fleeing the very filth they'd allowed to build up. Parliament literally considered suspending its operations, not for war, not for plague, for smell. The curtains were soaked in chloride of lime, the windows were draped, buckets of deodorizing chemicals were scattered around the room. They tried everything, but the smell wasn't some polite guest. It shoved its way in, and still the city kept moving. Because while Parliament argued about how to avoid the odor, everyone else lived in it, daily. The poor didn't get to flee. They didn't have second homes, country estates, or coastal cottages to escape to. They had alleyways, cramped tenements, and basements that flooded when it rained. Their windows were stuck shut with grime. Their water came from public pumps just a few steps away from open drains. Their lives were steeped in the stink, not because they were careless, but because the city had been built to trap them in it. Let's say you lived near Bermondsey. That part of the city had long been infamous for its smells: tanneries, glue factories, soap boilers. Had in the effluent from the slaughterhouses, and the human waste dumped in the gutters, and you had a neighborhood that smelled like 100 things dying all at once. And during the Great Stink, it got worse. The river rose. The drains backed up. The walls sweated moisture that smelled like rot. Children broke out in rashes. Babies cried through the night. People stopped cooking, not because they weren't hungry, but because the heat from the stove made the air in the room move. And that was worse than stillness. The irony was brutal. The city had just begun to pride itself on progress. Gaslights, railways, booming, trade. But all that advancement was balancing on a pile of human waste. And no one wanted to touch it, at least not until the stink reached the elite. That was the turning point. When the smell crawled into Parliament, it finally became a problem. Enter Joseph Bazalgette. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't rich. He was an engineer, quiet, methodical. And for years, he'd been proposing a solution to London's sewage problem. Nobody wanted to pay for it. Nobody wanted to rip up the streets or fund tunnels or think about where all that filth went after it left their homes. But now they didn't have a choice. The smell had cornered them. Bazalgette had a plan. Build massive underground sewer lines to carry the waste far downstream, out past the city, away from the places where people lived and drank. Not just a few pipes either. A system. Dozens of miles of brick-lined tunnels running beneath the city, large enough to stand in. It was bold, expensive, disruptive, but suddenly no one in Parliament was arguing anymore. They were too busy trying not to vomit, so the plan was approved. Construction would begin. But here's the thing. It didn't happen overnight. These were huge public works. Years of digging, engineering, labor, and in the meantime, the river still boiled. The stink didn't care about plans. While the government promised a cleaner future, people in Lambeth, Southwark, and Whitechapel still lived next to gutters that overflowed with excrement after every rain. Women still carried buckets to and from the pump. Children still played near ditches where rats scurried over the bones of old dogs. Disease still spread, and the poor still had nowhere else to go. You worked your shift. You staggered home. You tried to sleep while your stomach churned from the smell. And in the morning you did it again, because even with the stink the city demanded your labor. You were a seamstress, a street cleaner, a fish seller, a barmaid. You couldn't afford to leave, even if the river itself climbed into your kitchen, and, for many, it did. Flooding wasn't rare. The Thames would rise unexpectedly, creeping through the foundations of old houses, soaking everything in its path. When that happened, the smell intensified. It got into the floorboards, into mattresses, into food storage. You could try scrubbing it out, but the water had its own agenda. The stink didn't just affect your comfort. It lowered your odds of surviving winter, and still Londoners endured it. They walked the streets with their heads down. They lit extra candles to cover the smell. They chewed mint leaves and sprinkled vinegar on their collars. They burned dried herbs near windows. Everyone had a trick. None of them worked. But they kept doing it anyway, because pretending you could fix it was better than admitting you couldn't. Some people grew bitter. They cursed the river, cursed Parliament, cursed the engineers who said they were fixing things while the city still reeked. Others just went quiet. Endurance had no voice in those days. You swallowed your complaints like the sour air around you. But the silence wasn't empty. It was survival. And even as Parliament shut its windows, the rest of the city had to leave theirs open just to breathe. They say the smell of London could be detected miles outside the city by that July. That carriages would speed up as they approached, passengers pulling out scented handkerchiefs and praying for wind. But inside the city, there was no escape. The breeze could shift in a second and turn your breakfast queue into a scene of mass retching. Priests paused mid-sermon. School teachers lost their voice. Couples cancelled weddings, and still the river rolled on, still thick, still brown, still full of London's secret. Only now it wasn't a secret anymore, and something worse than smell was about to rise from its waters. By now the smell was the least of your problems. Sure, it still lingered in your nose, still clung to your skin, your sheets, your soup. But by late July, Londoners had grown used to the reek, or at least stopped talking about it. You can get used to anything eventually, even air that feels like it's been wrung from a used sponge. But what you don't get used to is death arriving unannounced, without warning, without knocking. Just one morning, someone collapses. Then another, then a dozen, then 100. And by the time anyone starts asking questions, the answer's already in your bloodstream. It started near the Broad Street pump, but that wasn't the only one. There were pumps like it all over the city, serving thousands. You'd wait in line with your bucket, exchange the usual complaints, heat, wages, smell, and go home thinking nothing of it. The water looked clear. It tasted fine. But it wasn't. It was poison. Slow at first, then terrifyingly fast. One cup was enough to ruin you. Cholera didn't announce itself with a fever or a cough. That would have been polite. No, it hit low and fast. Vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration so severe your skin puckered like dried fruit. You'd be fine at breakfast and dead before supper. It didn't care how strong you were. It didn't care if you prayed or swore, if you lived in a tenement or behind a shop front. It came through the water, and the water came through the city like blood through veins. In a place where toilets emptied into rivers and rivers fed the taps, it spread like spilled ink, and once it started, no one knew how to stop it. People still believed in bad air, miasma. That smell equals sickness. And sure, the stink from the Thames was appalling. But it wasn't what was killing you, it was the invisible, the tasteless. The microbes no one could see, they didn't know that yet, not really. Germ theory hadn't taken root. You couldn't treat what you didn't understand. And so people just died. They died in their beds, in the street, in hospitals that had no real medicine, just hope and vinegar-soaked rags. Entire households were gone in a week. Mothers clutched. Children who'd already stopped breathing. Breadwinners collapsed mid-shift and were carried out with handkerchiefs over their faces. The graveyards swelled, and the smell that once came from the river now seeped from the bodies. An odor, even thicker, even closer. The smell of death that no amount of chloride lime could scrub away, And yet, you had to keep going. You still got up in the morning, still boiled your tea, still went to work if you had it, queued for bread if you didn't. Because there were no lockdowns, no quarantine plans, just a quiet agreement among the living to keep pretending until it was their turn. London didn't stop. It limped. It staggered. It buried its dead and went back to work. You might have tried to find cleaner water if you had the time or the strength. Maybe you walked 2 neighborhoods over to a different pump. Maybe you begged for boiled water from a neighbor who still had firewood. But most people couldn't spare it. Everyone was stretched thin. Everyone had their own sick to care for. So you drank what you had, and you prayed it wasn't the last time. Some turned to religion. Some to alcohol. Most just stayed quiet. Death wasn't dramatic. It was dull. It was steady. It didn't need a parade. It came with whispers and gasps and the occasional cry muffled behind a wall. And all the while the river kept rolling. Every week, another body fished out. Some were suicides, desperate to escape the smell, the sickness, the slow collapse of their world. Others were the discarded, the forgotten, the poor who'd slipped through the cracks and into the water, their names unrecorded, their graves unmarked. The Thames took them all. It didn't care. It carried its cargo of waste and ghosts alike. Eventually, the government took notice. Not just of the deaths, but of the panic. Cholera wasn't new. It had been visiting London since the early 1800s, but this time, it arrived with a backdrop of stink that even the elites couldn't ignore. Suddenly, newspapers were filled with words like filtration and sanitation and public health. Suddenly, the engineers' plans had real urgency. The great stink hadn't just made London unbearable. It had made it dangerous. Bazalgettes, sewers already under construction, were now a matter of life and death. And though they'd take years to complete, people finally believed in them. Money flowed. Bricklayers worked day and night. Massive intercepting sewers snaked beneath the city like arteries. Slowly, painfully, the waste was being redirected. It wouldn't solve the cholera outbreak, not in time. But it was a start. A promise that maybe eventually no one else would die because they drank from the wrong pump. But that was later. Right now you're still in it. Still boiling your water when you can. Still watching your neighbors cough and clutch their stomachs and whisper prayers to saints they stopped believing in long ago. Still wondering if the headache you have is from the heat or from the disease. Still lying awake at night listening for the sound of your baby breathing and knowing that if it stops there's no one coming to help. Just a man with a cart and a cloth and a question you don't want to answer. Because the stink of 1858 wasn't just a nuisance, it was a message, a loud, gagging, gasping warning that the city couldn't keep living like this. That progress, without planning, is just rot in a prettier dress. That no empire, no matter how grand, can outrun its own waste forever. And the worst part? You survived. You against the odds managed to stay upright. You boiled your water or you didn't, you prayed or you didn't. But you kept breathing. You stepped over the gutters, you buried your sick. You watched the carts roll by and wondered how many names you'd forget by winter. And when the smell finally began to fade, weeks later after storms and cooler weather, you didn't rejoice. You didn't sing. You just sat and listened and tried to remember what clean air was supposed to feel like. Because in the end, the great stink wasn't a singular event, it was a symptom. A scream from a city choking on its own ambition, and though the smell faded, the scars did not. You might think laundry day is a bit of a chore, a pile of clothes, maybe a grumble or two, and a machine that does most of the work while you scroll through something mildly distracting. But in 19th century London, for a woman alone, especially a widow, laundry day was something else entirely. It wasn't an errand. It was survival. And it wasn't something you squeezed in between errands or errands between meetings. It was the day, the whole day. From before dawn to after dusk. No breaks, no shortcuts, no softener sheets. Just water, steam, smoke, and skin rubbed raw. Your hands ache before you even begin. You know what's coming. The tub is already cold, and half full, because you filled it last night with water from the hand pump down the road. It took 12 trips with a tin pail and a prayer that no one would tip it on the way back. If you're lucky, the pump still runs. If you're not, well, there's a filthy gutter and a prayer to St. Jude. You have a small fire going in the stove, barely warm enough to cook with, but today you're not cooking. You're boiling clothes, because that's the only way. To make sure they're clean enough, not just to look at, to touch, to wear. If you don't boil the lice out, they'll be back before nightfall. There's no washing powder, no scented detergent, just a bucket of grey soap scraps and something called soda ash, which burns your nose and your fingers if you breathe too close. You take what garments you have, underthings, a skirt, a man's old shirt you've cut down to size, and dunk them in the wash tub. The water's already black after 2 items. Doesn't matter. There isn't enough wood to start over, the E. Boiling begins, and with it the real work. You take a wooden stick, stained and split from years of the same task, and stir the pot of scalding laundry like some poor woman's soup. The steam burns your eyes, your face drips. Your hands, wrapped in rags, still blister from the heat. Every swirl of cloth releases another cloud of old sweat, coal soot, and whatever else the streets left behind. You gag, you keep stirring. Once it's boiled, it's time to beat it, because scrubbing alone isn't enough, not when the stains are from a week of labor or worse. You drag the steaming fabric out of the pot and slap it down on a board, a flat piece of rough wood nailed to the edge of your table. You pick up the dolly stick, a tool that looks more like a club than anything else, and you beat. You beat until your shoulders scream. You beat until the cloth turns white or gives up trying. It's not the sort of work you talk about. There's no romance in it. No one writes poems about steam-burned cheeks and rag-wrapped knuckles. But it's necessary. Your clothes are one of the few things that still belong to you. They need to last. You can't afford new ones, not even second-hand. Every hole stitched, every fray patched. That skirt's been turned inside out twice already. The blouse once belonged to your husband. You kept it, not out of sentiment, but because it's thick cotton and takes longer to wear through. You scrub the hems against the washboard, a piece of ridged metal that squeals with each stroke. Your fingers cramp. The water is no longer warm. It's gone, cold and thick, but there's more to do, always more. You keep going, because stopping means sitting in wet clothes next week. It means people staring when you walk into the workhouse queue. It means children, if you still have any, scratching themselves bloody from the bugs. The floor is soaked. Your dress is clinging to your knees. You wipe your face on your sleeve and keep scrubbing. The fire crackles low. You'll need to gather more coal chips later. If the street sweepers haven't picked the road clean and outside London moves on, no one sees your work. No one cares. You hang the clothes later and neighbours might pass and nod, but they won't ask about your back or your red, cracked hands. They won't ask why your husband's shirt still smells like soap and memory. Because in this part of London, everyone is tired. Everyone is fighting the same war against dirt and cold, and the creeping feeling that maybe things will never change. And still, you scrub, you boil, you beat. Because in the end, the only thing worse than laundry day is having nothing left to wash. It doesn't take much to break your skin. A few loads in cold water, a poorly placed stitch in your wrapping cloth, and before long your hands are red and splitting like old paper left too close to the fire. And yet you're still not halfway done. The worst part isn't the scrubbing, or the boiling, or the sheer weight of wet fabric. It's the soap. Calling it soap feels generous. It's more like lye in a lump, a blend of animal fat and ash and sharpness. Sometimes it's homemade, traded from another woman who cooked it herself over a fire with scraps of sweet and caustic soda. Sometimes it comes as a hard grey block, chipped off a larger slab in the back of the grocer's shop. It has no smell, or worse, it smells like meat left too long in a warm room. But it works. It strips grease, it eats stains, and it chews your hands to the bone. By midday, the skin around your nails is raw. Your knuckles are ringed in red cracks. It stings to bend your fingers, but you do it anyway, because the clothes haven't rinsed yet. They're still coated in soap scum and suds so thick, you could scoop them up and use them to scrub the floor. You would too if it meant saving water. The rinsing is the most thankless part. The water that was once clean is now grey and full of floating threads and lint and things best not named. You draw up another bucket if you can. If not, you reuse what's there, shaking the garments out by hand, one at a time, wringing them between your fists like you're trying to strangle the past week out of them. The effort leaves your arms trembling. Your shoulders sore and your back aching so deep it reaches into your lungs. You don't complain. Who would you complain to? No one listens to widows. You've been invisible since the day the death certificate was signed. When your husband died, so did your standing in the world. What's left is duty. Wash what you own. Mourn in silence. Keep the soap out of your eyes. There's a small towel you use for your face. You saved it from your husband's shaving kit. You dip it in the rinse water and press it to your cheeks, hoping it cools the burn. The towel smells faintly of coal and old tobacco. You keep using it anyway. It's one of the few soft things in the house. Sometimes you hum. Not a song, just a low sound that fills the silence, makes the work feel a little less endless. But mostly, you listen. To the fire, to the creak of wet wood underfoot, to the distant clatter of cartwheels on stone, and to the voices of other women down the alley, scrubbing their own ghosts out of cloth and linen. You're not alone, not really. Every woman on your street has her own wash day. Sometimes you trade secrets. Boil the collars first. Use vinegar. For sweat. Rub the soap in before the water gets hot. But no one has a cure for the burning hands. That's just part of the job. And of course, it's not the only job. Once the laundry's been rinsed, it has to be carried. Wet cloth is heavy, heavier than it has any right to be. A single wool skirt holds more water than you can wring out. You haul the pile out into the open air if you're lucky enough to have access to a shared line. If not, you string up rope between windows or use the narrow rail outside your door. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is getting it dry before the fog rolls in again, or before soot from a neighbor's chimney settles on your only clean dress. There's no dryer, no spin cycle, no airy cupboard to hang things in, just the wind and hope. And sometimes, neither shows up. You lean against the wall, arms still sore from the rinse, fingers tingling from lion cold, and you think, not for the first time, that maybe people forget just how physical survival is. Not noble, not poetic, just physical. And constant. Every stitch, every scrub, every ragged breath spent trying to keep one step ahead of mildew and moths, and the creeping suspicion that this is all there is. You remember women in finer neighborhoods who pay others to do this work. Laundresses. Washerwomen the help. But you don't live on that street. You're not the sort who gets help. You are the help. Only no one's paying you. Still, the clothes are clean now, or as close to clean as they'll ever be. The skirt still smells like ash. The blouse still has a stain on the cuff you couldn't lift. But it's something. A small wrinkled victory. And your hands. They're worse than before. Deep pink now, puckered and split at the knuckles. You try not to look at them. Just wrap them in the end of your apron and press on the soft skin to check for tenderness. It stings, it always stings. There's a tin of old ointment in the cupboard. You found it weeks ago behind a jar of cracked buttons. It smells like turpentine and old leaves, but you use it anyway, smearing a thin layer over your palms and waiting for the numbness to come. It doesn't. Still, you sit for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to exhale. To listen to the sound of dripping cloth and ticking silence. The fire's burned low again. You'll need to find more coal. You'll need to find more everything. But for now, the soap has done its job, and your hands, red and raw, have done what they were told. By the time the last shirt is wrung and the final skirt shaken free of rinse water, you're too tired to feel much of anything. The fire's a smudge of dying orange, your arms hang like rope, and your fingers sting in rhythm with your pulse. And still, there's more to do. Because wet laundry doesn't mean clean laundry, not until it's dry. And in London, in your part of the city, drying is its own test of endurance. You step outside with the first bundle, cloth clinging to your chest, the air cool and heavy. Not fresh, never fresh, just damp and dark with soot. The kind of air that weighs on your back and settles into your lungs like coal dust. There's no garden here, no yard or wide green space where linens can flap in the breeze. You've got the alley, and a line stretched between two rusted nails hammered into the bricks above the rear stair. One pull, and the rope sags under the weight of wet wool. You start hanging, one pin at a time, fingers slipping, breath shallow. The sheets drip, tapping against each other in a slow rhythm, a lullaby of labor. Somewhere down the alley, another woman is doing the same thing. You hear the creak of her line, the rattle of a clothespin jar. Laundry day's never a solo event. even if no one speaks. You all exist in the same fog, in the same long silence, each of you wrapped in your own aches and tasks. And then, just as the last piece is up, the wind changes. Barely. A soft shift that carries the scent of chimney smoke and damp stone. You curse under your breath. Not loud, but enough. The chimneys are alight again. The neighbors burning anything that will catch. Soft coal, peat bricks, old rags. The air turns grainy, sharp. The clothes you've spent hours beating, boiling and rinsing begin to wear that scent again, as if London herself refuses to let them go. As if the city's grime is not something that can be scrubbed out, only rearranged. But what can you do? You can't take them down, you can't leave them in a heap. So you leave them there, exposed to smoke and soot and a sky that never fully clears. You go back inside, peel off your apron and sit. Not because you're done, but because standing any longer would feel like betrayal. The room is quiet, not peaceful. Just quiet in the way that tells you the neighbors have closed their shutters and the fire's burned too low for anything but sleep. The smell of wet cloth fills the space, mingling with ash and your own sweat. You hold your hands out in front of you. They look older than they are. Stained and blistered, knuckles thick, nails chipped. You used to wear a ring. It's in a tin, now tucked away where you won't lose it. You don't wear it anymore. Rings and scalded hands don't mix. You rub your palms together and listen. There's the drip from the line, the crack of a beam cooling in the ceiling, the soft shuffle of someone moving upstairs. It's strange, this kind of tired. It doesn't hurt, not exactly. It's deeper than that. More like being hollowed out and filled with smoke. A kind of weariness that isn't fixed by rest, only by change. And you know change won't come. Soon you think of your husband. Not with longing, not anymore, just as a fact. He used to do the wringing for you when your hands were worse. He'd make jokes about the water turning black, say you were washing London itself out of the clothes. Then he'd cough, and the joke would stop. The coughing didn't stop, though, not until he did. Now the work's yours alone. It always was, really. The only difference is how quiet it is afterward. The clothes will be dry by morning if the fog holds off and the soot isn't too thick. You'll fold them by candlelight, careful with the seams, shaking off the dust like crumbs from old bread. You'll wear them again by week's end. The skirt that still smells faintly of smoke, the blouse with the mended hem, the underthings patched and sewn and patched again. Nothing new, nothing soft, but clean, at least in the way clean means. Something here. And when someone passes you in the street, a factory girl, a butcher's wife, a clerk's tired daughter, they'll glance at your clothes and nod. Not with pity, with recognition. Because they know what soap can do to hands, what fog does to fabric, what silence does to a room when the work is done and no one is left to notice. Laundry day, they'll say, if they say anything at all, and you'll nod too. Because yes, it was. And it always will be, it's late. So late that even the fog has given up and settled down. The coals in the stove are grey. Your tea has long gone cold, and you were just beginning to think you might sleep. Through the night, that rarest kind of evening where the world forgets to need you for a while. And then comes the knock, always the same knock, 3 times, firm and urgent. Not the kind you can ignore. You don't ask who it is. You already know. There's a woman across the city whose pain just turned sharp, whose body just shifted from waiting to delivering. Someone sent a boy running through the streets to find you, and now he's on your stoop, cap in his hands, panting, telling you it's time. You nod. No time for tea, no time for more coal, just coat bag and out the door. The street outside is quiet but never empty. Gas lamps flicker like tired eyes. Somewhere in the dark, a cat screeches and a drunk curses at the cobblestones. You move through it all with practiced steps. You know these alleys, these doorways. You've walked them in rain, in snow, in fog so thick you could taste the coal in your teeth. And tonight is no different. The boy leads you, darting between puddles and half-frozen gutters. His breath clouds the air, but he doesn't slow, neither do you. Because someone is waiting, someone is screaming. And it's not just the baby you have to worry about. It's the mother. They never tell you much on the way, just the basics. She's young, or it's her 5th. Sometimes, the last one didn't make it. You nod, but none of That tells you what you'll find when you step into that cramped room. Sometimes it's too late before you even arrive. Other times, you get there just in time to hear a cry, sharp, new, hopeful. But most nights fall somewhere in between. Where in between? You arrive? A tenement. Narrow stairs, air thick with smoke and sweat. You duck your head under the beams, climb to the top floor where the screaming starts again. A woman sobbing, a man shouting for someone to get more rags, a child crying from behind a curtain. You push the door open and step inside, and the room falls quiet for just a breath because you've arrived. The midwife. The one who knows what to do even if it hurts. You don't speak right away. You set down your bag, you take off your gloves, you look around. There's a basin of water, already clouded with blood. A thin blanket on the floor, soaked through. The woman is lying back on a bundle of coats, legs trembling, face pale. You kneel beside her, touch her wrist, feel the pulse racing beneath her skin. She looks at you with wide eyes, not trust, not yet, but desperation. You're her last. Hope tonight, maybe her only one. You nod once and then the work begins. It's going to be a long night. You already know that. You've been here before. Not in this exact room, but in rooms like it. Damp corners of London where birth is not miracle but battle. Where women lie on pallets made of coats, bleeding into the seams, and pray to survive. The air is always the same, stale with coal. Smoke and something sour, a sharpness that sticks to your tongue. You ask for more rags, you ask for water, you always ask, even when you know what the answer will be. They bring you a chipped basin and a half-filled kettle. The water's barely warm, likely drawn hours ago and left on the edge of a dying fire. Still, you work with what you have. That's the job. Always has been. You kneel, roll up your sleeves and brace yourself for what comes next. The mother's. Contractions are sharp now, fast and close. Her breathing ragged, panicked. You tell her to focus on your voice, not the pain. She tries. You can see it. The way her eyes search your face, needing something solid to hold on to. You offer your hand. She grips it with all she has left. This is her first, you realize, and no one's told her how long it can take. No one's warned her about the blood, the pressure, the tearing. You try to keep your voice steady, calm, practical. Because panic won't help her, and fear spreads fast in a room like this. You've seen what happens when it does. You've seen women go still mid-labor, frozen by dread. You've seen labor stall for hours, then rush forward too fast. And you've seen the end come quietly, when the body just gives up before the child arrives. But she's fighting. You can tell. Every push is a cry, a plea. The father, if he is the father, hovers in the corner, arms folded, face pale. He wants to help, but he's useless here. Most men are. You don't blame him for it. You just wish he'd stop pacing. You boil what water you can. You fold the cleanest cloth into layers, ready for the moment you'll need them most. Your bag is open beside you. Thread, scissors, a curved needle for stitching if it comes to that. You hope it doesn't. Stitching. By candlelight with trembling fingers is always a last resort. The baby isn't turning as it should. You can feel it. Wrong angle, too high. You whisper to the mother, tell her not to push yet. She sobs and begs, but you know her body will do what it must. You adjust your hands. You breathe through your teeth. You pray, though you don't believe anymore, and you try. Minutes blur into something longer. The room grows hotter despite the winter chill outside. Everyone is sweating now. The baby's head begins to crown, and the mother screams a sound that's not quite human. You feel the tear before you see it. You press cloth to the wound, try to slow the bleeding. But your focus has to be on the child. That's how it works. One hand for the mother, one for the baby, and not enough time for either. The child comes at last, a slow, slippery slide into the world, not crying yet. You wipe the nose, clear the mouth, rub the back with a clean cloth. Still nothing. You speak softly, urgently to the tiny body in your hands. Another rub, another breath, and then a sound. A weak, warbling wail. Not strong, but real. You exhale for the first time in what feels like hours. The mother goes limp, sobbing with relief and agony all at once. You place the baby in her arms, wrap them both in the cleanest blanket you could find, and only then do you let your shoulders drop. You still have to stop the bleeding. still have to stitch, still have to clean everything as best you can. But for one small moment, in this damp room above a grocer's shop, you've won. And yet you know it's not over, because this isn't the kind of night that ends neatly, not with a cry and a smile. Not yet. The child is breathing. That should bring relief, and it does in a way, but not enough. Not yet, because the mother isn't done. Her eyes roll back and her head tilts, sweat pooling in the hollow of her neck. Her arms barely curl around the baby. You recognize the signs instantly. You've seen too many women bleed out in rooms just like this, with a newborn on their chest, and the whole city just steps away unaware. You press your hand to her abdomen. Now it's too soft. The womb isn't contracting as it should. You massage it, firm, steady pressure, and she groans, half-conscious, barely tethered to the room. More blood spills. Too much. The cloth you had ready is soaked in seconds. You reach for another, then another. The father, or maybe it's her brother, you don't ask anymore, steps closer, eyes wide. "Is she going to die?" he whispers. Not to you exactly, more to the room or to himself. You don't answer. You can't, not yet. You've said the wrong thing before and watched hope collapse like wet paper. Instead, you keep working. You keep pressing. You keep willing her body to remember what it's supposed to do. You call for someone to boil more water, even though you know it's too late for cleanliness to matter much. At this point, it's about heat, warm compresses, anything to help the body hold itself together. You reach for the needle. The thread is coarse and your fingers are shaking. But you don't let yourself hesitate. You stitch. You press. You whisper things that you don't even believe, just in case she does. Time stretches in moments like this. The room grows smaller. The sounds sharper. The ticking of the clock on the mantel, the whistle of wind outside the cracked window, the soft grunt of the baby, oblivious to how close it all came to unraveling. And then, slowly, the bleeding begins to slow. The mother's pulse, though still weak, steadies. Her eyes flutter open, and for the first time she sees her child. Not just the shape of it, but the life of it. And something in her face shifts. A quiet understanding, maybe even a little peace. You lean back, your knees stiff, your shoulders sore. The worst has passed, and at least for tonight. But you don't let yourself relax too much. Birth is a beginning, but it's not safety. Not here, not in this city. Infection can creep in before the linen's even dry. Fever can follow in the days to come. You've seen women smile with a newborn one evening and slip into silence before the week is out. You wrap what's left of your tools, blood on your apron, blood on your sleeves. You don't have another clean dress. You'll scrub it tomorrow or the day after, when your hands stop shaking. Before you leave, you look at the child again. Small dark hair already frowning like he knows what kind of world he's arrived in. You wonder if he'll survive the year. You wonder if the mother will. But those aren't questions for tonight. Tonight, they're both breathing. The man thanks you, awkwardly, softly. He presses a coin into your palm. You don't check the amount. You never do, not right away. You don't do this work for money, though you need it. You do it because someone must. Because in a city that swallows women whole, someone has to be there when life begins. Even if no one stays to see what becomes of it, you step out into the street. The fog has lifted, just barely. Your breath clouds in the cold air. Somewhere, a church bell rings. 4 a.m. You wonder how many more knocks you'll answer before the year is through. And you wonder, as you always do, how long your hands will keep steady and how many more nights you'll spend trying not to lose someone. If you've ever woken up dreading the day ahead, you already know something of this life. But the difference is you got to wake up in a bed. You probably had a blanket, maybe even breakfast, for a chimney sweep in Victorian London, especially if you were a child. The day didn't begin so much as it resumed. You didn't wake up, not really. You just opened your eyes in the same airless corner where you'd passed out, lungs still full of dust from yesterday. And when the voice came, since rough, loud, close, you moved. No questions, no time. Just cold feet against cold floorboards, scrambling into your trousers while the man who owned you waited downstairs, pipe already clenched between his teeth. You didn't call him father. He wasn't. You called him master. And he wasn't paid to be kind. There were other boys in the room, curled against each other for warmth, elbows and knees tangled in threadbare coats. Some were smaller, some older, if they lasted that long. You were one of them now, part of the sooty little crew that got hauled across the city every morning to clean the chimneys no one else wanted to think about. Your tools were simple: a brush, a scraper, a rope, and your own small frame, because you weren't being paid for strength. You were being paid, or rather he was, for your size. You were small enough to fit where grown men couldn't. That was the job. That was your life. The first chimney of the day was only a few blocks away. The cart rattled over cobblestones, piled with gear and children, and a few sacks of soot already gathered from yesterday's haul. You breathed through your mouth, tried not to gag on the smell. No one spoke. There was no point. You arrived before the sun did. That was part of the promise. Sweeps were to be invisible. No smoke during the day, no soot falling on the breakfast crowd. So the dirtiest work happened in the quiet hours, before respectable families opened their curtains. The master knocked on the back door of the house, always the back, and waited for the maid. She handed him a few coins and showed you the way. Parlour chimney, 3rd floor. Narrow. She warned you, like it mattered. You were first up. You always were. Your arms shook from the cold, and your feet slipped on the stone, but you knew better than to hesitate. You climbed into the fireplace, feeling the edges of the flue close in around you, brick on your side, soot already clinging to your skin. The first shove came fast, a push between the shoulder blades. Encouragement, he'd say. You moved up, always up. Knees against brick, hands groping for footholds that weren't there. The world turned blacker the higher you climbed. The soot thickened, clinging to your lashes, your teeth, your tongue. You stopped coughing after the first few minutes, not because it got better, but because coughing meant stopping, and stopping meant trouble. You didn't know the names of the families in the houses you cleaned. You didn't need to. They stayed upstairs while you worked. You were something like the rats, necessary, unpleasant, and better left unseen. Their children were still sleeping in warm beds. You were inside the chimney, inches from a century of soot, praying you didn't get stuck, because if you did, there was no rescue. No one came with a ladder or rope. If you stopped moving, they lit a fire, slowly at first, just enough heat to encourage you onward. The first time it happened to you, you were 6. You remember the crackling sound more than the pain, the sound of the fire starting below you while your ribs scraped against stone. You keep climbing, because you have to. You keep climbing because there's nothing else to do. The inside of the flue is narrower now. Your shoulders scrape against the sides with every push. The soot is so thick it cakes under your fingernails and coats the inside of your nose. You try not to think about how much you're swallowing. You try not to think about anything except where to place your next foot, your next hand, and how much longer, until you can crawl out and breathe again. The top is farther than it looks. Always is. Some chimneys are crooked, turns and bends, built to catch sparks or slow drafts. Those are the worst. You have to twist your body into angles it wasn't made for. Sometimes you get stuck and panic sets in before you even realize it. Your legs cramp, your lungs scream, and the only way out is up. There's a word they use for boys like you. Climbing boys. It sounds almost cheerful, like something you'd hear in a nursery rhyme. But there's nothing cheerful about dragging your ribs across bricks while your skin splits open beneath your shirt. Nothing sweet about the constant taste of ash. You don't climb because you like it. You climb because you were bought, or orphaned, or forgotten. And now this is the only job your body is small enough to do. The soot gets everywhere. Into your scalp, under your clothes. Inside cuts that never get the chance to heal. Your elbows are always raw. Your knees never stop bruising. You're not even 10, and your lungs already rattle when you sleep. The master says it's normal. Says it's just chimney cough. He laughs when one of the boys hacks up blood. You learn not to mention it. At the top you reach the pot, the metal crown of the chimney, and you pause just long enough to scrape the build-up from the inside rim. You know better than to stop for breath. The soot clumps tumble past you, falling down the flue like dirty rain. You'll have to climb back through it on the way down, but that's not your problem yet. You begin your descent, careful not to slip. The bricks are slick now and your body is shaking. Your hands don't always listen when you tell them to grip. You move slowly because falling isn't just dangerous, it's fatal. A broken arm gets you thrown out. A broken back. Buried cheap. At the bottom, the master is waiting. He doesn't ask if you're all right. He glances at your face, then your hands, then checks to see how much soot you brought down. If it's enough, he might let you drink. If it's not, you go back up. You do 5 chimneys today, maybe 6. Each one is worse than the last. Your muscles scream, your fingers bleed, but you stop feeling the pain somewhere around chimney 3. After that, it's just noise, just motion, just the grim, clinging reality that this is your life. Up, down, cough, scrape, repeat. The other boys don't talk much, they don't need to, you've all seen the same things. Watched another boy freeze mid-climb, sobbing, stuck between 2 turns in the flue, and no one came to help. Watched a lad fall head first and not move again. The master didn't waste time, he just lit a pipe and sent in the next one. Sometimes if the job is far enough away, you ride in the back of a coal cart, packed in like potatoes, wrapped in rags. You try to nap, but it's a hard thing to do with soot in your ears and the cold creeping into your bones. So you stare at the black sky, count stars through the fog, and wonder what it would feel like to breathe air that doesn't hurt. You pass houses with warm windows. You imagine what it's like inside them. Clean shirts, bowls of soup, mothers who don't trade their children for coin. You're not angry, not exactly, you're just tired, and you wonder how much longer your body will stay small enough to be useful. Because you've seen what happens to the boys who grow too big to climb, and it's not a promotion. You don't know the exact day it happens, but you feel it. One morning, as you crawl into the fireplace, something's different. The fit is tighter. Your shoulders brush the walls sooner than they used to, oozed. Your elbows stick where they used to slide. You've grown. Not much, an inch, maybe 2, but enough for the chimney to notice. Enough for the master to notice, too. He eyes you in the yard that afternoon, pipe dangling from his lip. Doesn't say anything. Just squints. Measures you in silence like he's trying to decide if you're worth keeping. You don't ask questions. You just hold your brush and your soot sack and wait for him to nod. But you feel it sinking in. You're aging out. That's the cruel trick of it. You survive long enough to grow, and growth becomes the threat. Chimneys don't get wider. You get thicker, heavier, harder to push and pull. The very thing that kept you fed, barely, is the thing that will now cut you off. Some boys stay on as assistants. They haul gear, clean tools, sweep hearths instead of climbing them. But that pays less, and the master never needed you for your brains. You're not fast with numbers. You can't read. You don't have family to speak up or savings to fall back on. You're just another soot-covered face in a city full of them. You hear stories, boys who got too big and were turned out. Some found factory work, long hours, blinding noise, the promise of mangled fingers and no sleep. Others disappeared entirely, caught fever, fell into crime. One ended up in the river, though no one says exactly how. You don't ask. You just keep your head down and climb when told. But the chimneys grow crueler. You bruise faster now. You slip more. One morning you wedge your leg wrong on a bend and can't move. Panic takes over. It always does. You cry out before you know you've done it. Voice echoing inside the flue. The master doesn't light a fire. Not this time. But he does shout. Calls you names you've heard before. Tells you to figure it out, or he'll send someone smaller to finish what you couldn't. Finish what you couldn't. You get out. Somehow. You scrape skin and tear fabric, but you wriggle free and drop to the hearth in a heap. The maid gasps when she sees you. You ignore her. You stand, dust off, and wait for the next order. At night, your cough is louder than ever. It rattles your ribs and brings up streaks of red you wipe on your sleeve. You know what it is. So does the master. So does every other boy who's done this job for too long. It's soot lung, and once you get it, it never really goes away. You'll wheeze for the rest of your life, however long that is. You sleep with a cloth over your mouth now, not that it helps. The room is thick with dust and breath and too many limbs fighting for space. You dream about falling, about getting stuck, about smoke creeping up behind you while your hands slip on the stone. You dream of coughing and not waking up. There's no future plan, no savings, no letters from relatives. You are one bad climb away from being useless, and useless boys don't stay long. One of the others, a kid named Alfie, Stopped working last week. Fever, shaking, couldn't stand. The master sent him out and locked the door. You haven't seen him since. You used to wonder what it would be like to grow up, to be tall, strong, to not be afraid of chimneys anymore. Now you realize growing up just means becoming someone no one wants to hire. The job's only for the small, the pliable, the ones who can still be shoved and bent and forced into brick tunnels without breaking. But now your bones crack when you twist. Your knees don't bend like they used to. And your eyes are always red from ash and tears. You keep going. Because it's that or nothing. The soot is inside you now. It's in your lungs, your skin, your blood. You carry it with you even when the day's over. You smell like it, taste it. You could scrub yourself raw and still be black beneath your fingernails. And still you climb. Because as long as you can still fit inside the chimney, you're not finished yet. But the chimney's shrinking. Or maybe it's just you finally getting too big to survive. You never really expected help. Not the kind that makes things better. But when your last loaf of bread turned green, when your boots gave out and your fingers were too numb to beg, you did what you swore you'd never do. You went to the workhouse. Not because you thought it would be kind, just because it was the only place that hadn't shut its door in your face. Yet you stood outside it for too long pretending to decide, when really you already had. The cold made the choice for you, so did your hunger, and the way your knees buckled when you tried to walk away. There was no dramatic knock, no dramatic welcome either. A man with ink-stained fingers took your name down, or tried to, you, mumbled something close enough. And then the door shut behind you, not gently, not like a door to a home, it closed like a lid. The first thing you lost was your name. They gave you a number instead, and a rough sack of clothing. Not sized, not clean, just a set. Your old clothes were taken and likely burned or boiled or sold, doesn't matter, you won't see them again. Then came the separation. Men to the left, women to the right, children split according to age, no goodbyes, no time for it. If you were lucky, you kept sight of a sibling for a few minutes longer. If not, they disappeared into another hallway, and that was that. The workhouse didn't care about families. It cared about order. You were led into a room that smelled like old wool and boiled things that didn't belong in a pot. Beds lined the walls, thin mattresses, straw inside, stained from years of tired bodies. You didn't ask questions. You lay down. You closed your eyes. You tried not to think about what tomorrow would be. Morning came with the kind of bell. That wasn't meant to wake you gently. It tore you out of whatever dream you'd found and dropped you straight back into the cold. The ward mistress barked something. You didn't understand every word. You didn't have to, you followed, everyone did. Breakfast wasn't food exactly. It was something between broth and paste, grey, warm and bitter. You ate it fast, everyone did. Not because it was good, but because it was there. It hit your stomach like stone, but it kept you upright, for now. And then came the work. The lie is in the name, workhouse. Like it's a place where people go to get jobs, like there's dignity in it. But no, the workhouse didn't offer work. It demanded it. Long hours, repetitive tasks, hard, punishing, pointless. Picking oakum, pulling tarred rope into strands until your fingers bled. Breaking stones for roads you'd never walk. Washing linens that would never be clean. There was no wage. Just the same bowl of gruel, the same bed, the same bell. And if you worked too slowly or talked too loudly or coughed at the wrong time, you got docked a meal or sent to isolation. The punishment wasn't clever. Just hunger and silence, which was enough. The supervisors didn't shout much. They didn't need to. Their silence said it all. You were here because you'd failed. Failed to survive outside, failed to keep your house, failed to matter. The workhouse reminded you every day that you weren't a person anymore. Just a body in a system, a number on a ledger. There were others, of course, dozens, hundreds, a constant stream of pale faces and sunken eyes. Some younger than you, some older. A woman with white hair and no teeth. A boy no older than 6 who never spoke, just rocked back and forth when no one was watching. You didn't talk much either. Talking wasn't encouraged. Neither was resting, smiling, or hope. Those things were dangerous here. Hope made you soft. Hope made you think you might leave one day. You wouldn't. Not unless something changed, and nothing ever changed. You don't count the days in the workhouse. There's no need. They all look the same. You wake to the clang of that same bell. You eat from the same tin bowl. You sit at the same bench. You pick at the same rope or turn the same wheel. The hours don't feel separate anymore. It's all one long stretch of numbness, broken only by the sting in your fingers or the ache in your back. It's not that the work is hard in the way digging a ditch is hard. It's hard in the way that wears you down, slowly, quietly. Every tug on a rope takes a little more skin. Every hour under a windowless roof steals a little more light from your eyes. You don't cry, you don't speak. You just keep your head down and pull, pull, pull. They say it's to teach you discipline, to give you structure, to make you grateful for the outside world, but really it's punishment. Not for a crime, but for existing without money. You could be a widow, an orphan. A man who broke his leg at the wrong time and never found another job. Doesn't matter. Once you're inside, the reason dissolves. You're just one of them now. One of the poor. Some try to leave. They beg the master for release. Say they'll find work. Say they've got a cousin in Brixton or a friend in the docks. But it's no use. You don't just walk out. You need papers. You need permission. And even if you get it, where would you go? You'd be on the same streets that brought you here, with the same cold, the same hunger. So most people stay. Because this place, horrible as it is, has walls and gruel, and a bed you don't pay rent on. You stay because outside is worse. The women are kept apart from the men. You pass them sometimes in the corridors, eyes down. They work the laundry, scrubbing with lye so strong it eats the skin. They smell like steam and soap and something sharp beneath it. Sorrow, maybe. You once saw a girl, couldn't have been. More than 14, drop a sheet into the water and just freeze. She stood there shaking until a matron pulled her away and slapped her hard across the face. No words, just back to work. Children don't get better treatment. They don't get treated like children at all. Once they can walk, they can work. Some clean, some carry, some sit for hours pulling scraps from rags. They're pale, shivering and silent. You used to smile at them when they walked past. Now you don't bother. Smiling isn't safe here. It makes people look at you. The food never improves. Morning is gruel, noon is gruel. Evening might be bread or soup so thin it's mostly heat. If you complain, you get less. If you're caught stealing, you get beaten. No one steals twice. Not because they learn, because they don't recover. You start to forget what food used to taste like. You know you once had real meals, potatoes maybe, salt, a carrot stew, but the memories go soft at the edges, like old fabric. And now, when someone mentions roast beef or custard, it sounds like a story. Something made up, something from another life. You lose weight, but not the way you hoped. Your arms go thin, but your stomach swells. You've seen it happen to others, the belly that sticks out while everything else shrinks. It's not fat, it's hunger, deep hunger, the kind that makes your breath slow, the kind that whispers things in your ear when you're alone, things about bread, about butter, about chewing on cloth if it means pretending. You lie awake most nights, staring at the beams above you, counting each creak, each cough in the dark. Someone always coughs. Tuberculosis lives here, so does fever. If you get sick, they take you to the infirmary, a room that smells like bleach and resignation. There's no doctor, just a nurse with red hands and a bottle of something. That burns. That burns. People die here, quietly without ceremony. Sometimes they vanish from the bed next to you. One morning they're there, and by the next, the blanket's been folded and the name scratched out in the ledger. No one asks where they go. You already know a whole, a number, no headstone, and yet you keep working because you have to. Because they tell you that if you work hard enough, if you behave, if you never ask for more, maybe someday you'll earn your way out. You don't believe them, but you work anyway, because belief doesn't fill your bowl, and survival, at least here, is earned by the hour. You stopped dreaming a while ago. At first you noticed the difference, how your sleep no longer brought stories or faces from before. Now you barely sleep at all. When your eyes close, it's just black. When they open, it's the same bed, same wall, same coughs echoing. Through the dormitory, you used to whisper your name to yourself before sleep, like a charm to keep something of yourself alive. You don't do that anymore either. It starts slow, this forgetting. First, it's your favorite meal. Then the sound, of your mother's voice, the way the streets looked outside your old tenement. Soon even your last name begins to feel strange, like it belonged to someone else once. Someone who had shoes with laces, a bowl that wasn't dented, a window that let in light. They call you by your number here. And numbers don't have birthdays. They don't have brothers or sweethearts or dreams of being something more. They have tasks, quotas, the daily grind of quiet obedience. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't ask questions. You don't remember when that started. Just that silence became your safest habit. Every now and then a new person arrives, someone who still has color in their cheeks, who hasn't learned to keep their eyes down. They look around, eyes full of worry, not quite fear yet. You see in them what you used to have, that strange flicker of belief that maybe this place is temporary, that maybe there's a way out. You try not to look at them for too long, not because you're jealous. You're not, you're tired. And watching someone else hope feels like watching someone drown slowly. You want to tell them it gets easier, but that would be a lie. What really happens is that you get used to it. The way someone gets used to a limp or a missing tooth, it never feels right, but it becomes normal. You watch a boy across the dining hall one night. He's maybe 12, but already stooped like a man 3 times his age. His spoon clinks against the tin bowl with a rhythm that sounds almost deliberate. He stares straight ahead, chewing slowly, mechanically. You wonder what he used to be, like. Then you realize someone might be thinking the same thing about you. Outside, the world keeps turning. You hear whispers from the guards. There's a new queen, maybe. Or a cholera outbreak in the south, some factory collapsed. None of it feels real. You could be on the moon for all the difference it would make. News doesn't reach you. Time doesn't either. You hear the term pauper sometimes. It's written in ledgers, spoken by the supervisors, muttered by the clergyman who visits twice a month to read scripture in a voice so tired it could put out a candle. Pauper. You know, it means poor, but it feels like something worse. It feels like a verdict. You don't cry. Not because you're strong, but because your tears dried up weeks ago. Maybe months. The only time you feel anything close to emotion is when you see someone leave. Once in a rare while, someone's name is called and they're told they've found work. A cousin wrote, a factory needs a cleaner, a baker needs help. You watch them pack what little they have, a shirt, a comb, a folded letter. They don't say goodbye. No one does. There's no joy in leaving. Just luck. You wonder what it would take to be lucky. But then you remember, even if you got out, you'd be starting from nothing. No savings, no coat, no friends on the outside. Just your number scraped off a board and someone else moved into your bed. You don't hope. Hope is expensive, so you keep going. The routine is your world now. Wake, bell bowl, work bowl, bell bed, repeat. The only variations are the aches, a new sore on your hand, a new cough in your chest. You don't ask the nurse for anything. She doesn't have it. And if you're too sick to work, you might not get fed. You remember once long ago hearing someone say, there's dignity in labor. You think about that sometimes while breaking rocks in the cold yard, knuckles split and knees stiff. You wonder if that person ever spent a winter in a workhouse. You doubt it. You do what's required. You don't speak out. You don't resist. Because this place, brutal as it is, still keeps you from dying in a gutter. Barely. And the saddest part? You start to prefer it. The certainty. The sameness. The knowledge that tomorrow will hurt, yes, but at least it will come. That's something. And for people like you, something is better than nothing. So you whisper your number now, not your name, because that's the only thing the workhouse lets you keep. And now you've seen it. Not just read about it, not just imagined it, but walked it, lived it in a way. Through soot-stained windows and broken boots, through cold workhouse beds and cramped chimney flues, through endless shifts, burning soap, and breathless alleys that reeked of death more than they ever hinted at life. Victorian London. The city of empire, they said, of steam power and shining ambition, of queen and country, of progress and pride. But behind the polished statues and gaslit boulevards, this city had teeth. It chewed people up. It always did. And if you were poor, if you were a child or a widow or just a little unlucky, it didn't matter who you were swallowed whole. The truth is, most of us wouldn't last a day. Not really. Not without hot running water. Not without clean air or antibiotics or the luxury of choice. You'd miss soap, you'd miss sleep, you'd miss silence. But more than that, you'd miss being seen. Because in Victorian London, the poor weren't people, they were problems. And the system was built to punish them for surviving. You didn't get days off, you didn't get second chances. You got one bed, one crust of bread, one pair of lungs to cough through the fog. And if you lost any of those, you simply disappeared. And yet somehow people did survive. Not everyone, and not well, but they did. They raised children, they sang in alleyways, they stitched shirts by candlelight and whispered jokes under breath that smelled of coal dust and cabbage. They carved tiny spaces of humanity into a world that tried every day to take it from them. So no, you probably wouldn't survive a day in Victorian London. But they did. And maybe that's what makes their stories worth whispering as you drift off to sleep. Not because they're glamorous, but because they're true. And sometimes the quietest truths are the ones that stay with us the longest.